Promises have been made.
This government is committed to acting.
The NDP has a clear plan.
The Liberal Party is committed.
And challenged.
You can't allow that to be an excuse for inaction, and that's exactly what Stephen Harper is doing.
Canadians no longer trust their Prime Minister to tell them the truth.
The real threat to the middle class is what Justin's Liberals and the NDP are proposing.
Each party claims to be the best for the economy.
The fact that we have a budget balance and we're going to keep that balance is a good thing.
We have the best track record for balanced budgets of any party in Canada.
Our plan is real. His plan, he's not going to be able to pay for it.
The most compassionate to refugees.
We are going to make sure that we are selecting the most vulnerable bona fide refugees, well, obviously with a focus on the religious and ethnic minorities.
You don't get to suddenly discover compassion in the middle of an election campaign. You either have it or you don't.
The NDP doesn't think that more bombing and more war is the solution.
The best choice to protect our freedoms.
Canada is a country that protects people's rights.
I don't think that anyone has a right to tell a woman what to wear.
The threat to this country today is not CSIS, it is ISIS.
And our national security.
Mr. Harper is looking to profit from any sorts of politics of division or fear that he possibly can.
We will make sure that we are also protecting Canadians from the security risk.
Will Stephen Harper maintain the trust of Canadian voters?
I think the choice is clear.
Or will the left sweep into victory with Justin Trudeau or Thomas Mulcair?
When a plan isn't working, the real risk is sticking with the status quo.
Mr. Harper has simply failed.
The campaign is over. Canadians have made their choice, and your full results coverage starts right now on TheRebel.media.
Ezra, this is big night. This is the first night in our new studio, the studio that you helped build, you the audience. So a big thank you to you tonight. We'll get to election results in a second, but this is momentous for us, not just the nation.
That's right. You know, we started the Rebel.media the day after the Sun News Network shut down. A handful of us from the Sun started literally in our living rooms.
Absolutely. First video shot in living room.
That's right. Well, 1,700 little videos later, we decided to build a studio. Now, we're doing something pretty risky tonight, Brian. We're launching the studio for the first time ever, live on the most important news day of the year. I'm nervous, but I know our viewers will forgive us our baby steps. We've come so far in the last 8 months, I can hardly wait to see what we do next.
Well, I can hardly wait to see what the country is doing next, and that is perhaps changing government, perhaps keeping the government, but with a much reduced mandate. We are looking at either a big Liberal sweep, if you listen to some polls, a very small Conservative minority, if they pull rabbits out of their hat and get that ballot box bump that we often hear pollsters and pundits talk about. But right now, what we're seeing, 30 out of 32 seats in Atlantic Canada heading towards the Liberals. That means a bunch of Conservatives and a bunch of New Democrats losing. And to me, Ezra, that's been the story of the last little while in this election campaign. The Conservatives have been keeping their vote at a certain level, but the NDP has been cratering. Yeah. Not just a little bit, a lot. Started in Quebec with the NACAB issue, and then it spread. And obviously in Ontario, it wasn't the NACAB issue because while the vote in Quebec went to the Bloc and the Conservatives and a little bit to the Liberals, across the rest of the country, they've been falling in line behind Justin Trudeau and the Liberals.
That's right. While Thomas Mulcair and Justin Trudeau always poured cold water on the idea of a coalition or a unite the left, it looks like left-wing voters decided to do it on their own. It was touch and go who was ahead, the Liberals or the New Democrats, throughout the campaign. But once the Liberals started to break away, I think a lot of New Democrat Liberal switchers said, let's get behind one team. And when they made that decision, it was the Liberals who were ahead. It was obvious that the Liberals were going to do well in Atlantic Canada, but you combine that with the trending polls and the Unite the Left, it's a sweep. I think that obviously you're going to have Conservatives winning seats in Ontario and the West, but I think those two trends of Unite the Left and the poll trend continuing anyways, I think, I'm going to make a prediction now, just on these very early results. I predict that we will have a new Prime Minister Trudeau.
Well, that's looks like the most likely scenario right now. We're going to be in less than an hour having the polls close in Quebec, in Ontario Central and Mountain Time, and then at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific, that's when Vancouver, the rest of British Columbia, will shut down. So the question is, what happens in Quebec? What happens in Toronto? And I know that with Toronto right now, there's a Blue Jays game on. I know that that's the one team most Canadians are united behind, are the Blue Jays. So are they willing to say, I was wondering, I was talking about this on the radio earlier today, will the Blue Jays be a factor in this? If we see the kind of sweep that we saw in Atlantic Canada, obviously not. But I've been traveling around Toronto the last couple of days, and I tell you, in areas like Parkdale High Park, I don't see Peggy Nash losing her seat. In Toronto Danforth, do you see Craig Scott losing his seat? There are some solid NDP areas in downtown. But if you believe the polls, almost 50% of people are going to cast a ballot for Justin Trudeau. What's your feeling as you're a Torontonian now?
Oh, boy. Yeah, always with the insults, Brian. I'm joking around. Listen, Toronto is my home and I've embraced it. I'm in exile from Alberta. I'm joking around. This city has different parts to it. I mean, there's Ford Nation. Doug Ford got a third of the vote for city council. The New Democrats have their stomping grounds. But you're right, it's a battle. I mean, between Adam Vaughan and Olivia Chow, those are two titans for their respective parties.
And he's more of a communist than she is.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's no one for a conservative to vote for there. I think it's going to be bad news for the NDP because I think the Harper derangement syndrome, as I call it, is so strong that it will make New Democrats hold their nose and vote for the team they think is going to win. Now, Brian, I'm excited about today's show, and this is a baby step for us. We're not going to have all the bells and whistles of the other guys, but we've got some great commentary lined up. Let me give you an example. We've got Hamish Marshall, pollster with Torch, who's going to give us a riding result statistics look at things. And we also have some friends, we managed to find a liberal ally who's willing to come and give us the liberal point of view.
Yeah, my old friend Dan McTague used to cover Dan when I was with News Talk 1010, their Ottawa bureau chief. He was a local MP that we were always talking to, and of course, he was the guy in charge of consular affairs, so Canadians in Trouble, well known to the media. I was talking with Dan outside before we came into the studio. I'm not sure that Canadians realize what they're voting for when they back Justin Trudeau. This is not the centrist Liberal Party of the 90s. And I know that the Liberals in the 90s drove you nuts. And you thought they were far too left and we had to get rid of them. But they're looking like Stephen Harper compared to what we're about to get with Justin Trudeau, who's whispering in his ear? Who has the ear that the prince?
Well, Gerald Butts. He was the boss of the World Wildlife Fund Canada. Those are the guys who invented Earth Hour, where we all shut off the power and freeze in the dark. It's funny you say that. I was just reminiscing about Anne McClellan. For years, she was the only liberal in the province I'm from, Alberta. And, I'm a conservative-leaning guy, and I would like to criticize the Liberals, but Anne McClellan set the table for the growth of the oil sands in the, really when they started to boom in the year 2000, 2001, 2003. It was Anne McClellan who helped give birth to that industry.
And setting actual regulations. I know
and encouraging it.
Critics like to say there's no regulation on the oil sands, but they're there. They exist, and they started, as you say, very robustly under a Liberal.
That Liberal Party is gone. Today, Anne McClellan would be marginalized within the Liberal Party. Also, on human rights. I have my disagreements, for example, with the former MP, Irwin Cotler, but at least he was part of a pro-Israel component of the Liberal Party. That has been wiped out, as Sheila Gunn-Reid demonstrated in one of the videos that went viral on our website recently. The Liberal Party, I think it's partly because Justin Trudeau has a thing for authoritarian regimes, and partly because, Stephen Harper's done well with the Jewish community. Justin Trudeau has recruited so many, not just Muslim candidates, but Islamist candidates. What I mean by that is people who believe in political Islam. That explains his warmness to the niqab, his warmness to, convicted terrorists not having their citizenship stripped. What I'm worried about is not just that the Conservatives will lose. They've been in power for almost 10 years. We need to change the sheets. We need to do the laundry every once in a while, let someone else in there. It's this Liberal Party is not like Paul Martin, not like Jean Chrétien. They're going to be worse in foreign affairs, worse in taxation, worse on environmental policy. I think they're extremists.
Let's remind people of what Gerald Butts said when it came to the oil industry, though. He wants a Canada that is carbon-free.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, that sounds good. That sounds good, right? We'll get rid of carbon pollution. But forget about that argument. That means leave all the oil and gas in the ground. So that is a reduction in economic output. Also, we're talking about getting rid of plastics.
Yeah.
Think of all the things that oil helps create that we rely on a daily basis.
Here's what I'm worried about, is you've got Rachel Notley, the Premier of Alberta, radical Premier who has really declared war on the oil industry, doubled the carbon tax, jacking up corporate taxes, bringing in new climate change taxes. You've got Kathleen Wynne in Ontario, which is furthering the decline of the once great engine of Confederation. It's a have-not province, racking up debt every year, power prices through the roof. So you add to the demise, to Rachel Notley and Kathleen Wynne, you add on an extremist left-wing activist, Justin Trudeau. And he's not even the worst of it. It's people whispering in his ear like Gerald Butts and Omar Al-Jabra. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that this, it's not that the Liberals are winning that upsets me. I believe that we should alternate parties in government. It's that this kind of Liberal Party is going to destroy so many of the things we've taken for granted. Now, Brian, last word to you before we call in, before we move on to the next part of the show.
Well, one of the things I'll be talking about with Dan McTague later on is one of the changes that Justin Trudeau's promised, that this, if he wins, and this will happen whether he wins minority or majority, he's promised this will be the last first past the post election in Canadian history. And that is something that will put more hands. We all talk about, everyone says, oh, Stephen Harper very centralizing, the PMO has too much power. Think about the power this will put in the hands of party apparatchiks and the party leader. You want to run for a party, you're going to have to be on a slate. The party's going to have to approve you. There's going to be less say for community organizers, community leaders, and I don't mean that in the Barack Obama community organizer way. I mean real people from real communities representing those communities. That's going to fade away. Trudeau mentioned this at the beginning of the election campaign, has not campaigned on it. It has not been talked about a lot, but mark my words, he will do it. He will change the face of how we run democracy in this country, and it'll be less democratic, more top-heavy.
Brian, thanks for that. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Hamish Marshall, and I'm going to take a short break, get some more Red Bull, and try and keep my smile, and you guys will talk numbers. Coming right back on TheRebel.media.
The NDP has an obvious problem in this election. It's trying to form a government in Canada, and it's never done that before. In fact, it's never even come close. Their anomalous election result in 2011, getting over 100 seats, was more than twice as well as they had ever done in the past. Their previous record for seats was 43. Not only that, but they were well above their previous record share of the popular vote. They were over 30%. They'd never been much above 20 before. And of course, first past the post does exaggerate these things. Some people think that's a defect. Personally, I think it's a virtue. But I digress. The issue is, what are the NDP to do? And here I do feel a bit sorry for them. You see, Canadians have this infuriating habit, if you're in the NDP, of starting to swing to the party. Election after election, momentum builds, and just when things are looking great, thump, it collapses again. They all go home to the Liberals or some wretched stunt of that sort. It happened in the 30s and 40s. It happened in the 50s. It happened in the 60s. It happened in the 70s and the 80s. And always boom. And they're looking to come the biggest cropper in their history in the upcoming election. Because, of course, the result in 2011 was highly anomalous, and the anomaly, as you know, centered on Quebec, where they won 57 seats after having in their entire previous history only ever won one seat there in a federal election. Now, you think this is building toward a national power base, but it's quite the reverse. Remember, Quebecers had always been strategic voters. You didn't get a majority in Canada in the 20th century if you didn't get a majority of Quebec seats, with only a couple of exceptions, and one of those was the 1917 conscription election. But then in '93, Quebecers took their football and went straight home. 6 elections in a row, they gave more than half their seats to the Bloc Québécois, which could not in any way, shape, or form a government, even as part of a coalition. So when they swung to the NDP in 2011, they weren't looking to give it national power. They were continuing to take their votes out of the competition between the red team and the blue team. So the NDP's in big trouble if Quebecers start to swing back to, I don't know, the Phantom Bloc, to another Trudeau who's not quite like his father, who actually engendered a great deal of bitterness in Quebec, maybe even to some extent toward the Tories. But suppose they don't. Suppose they somehow hang on. They get 50 seats in Quebec. Now, they still need 120 elsewhere in the country if they're going to form a majority. And if they're, for some reason they're obsessed, they're saying 35 more seats and we can defeat Stephen Harper once and for all. Strangely apocalyptic language, as though he's Dracula or Sauron, keeps coming back from the grave. I don't know where this number comes from. Yes, if they gained 35 and the Tories lost 35, they would presumably then be invited to try and form a coalition government. But where are you meant to find them, even these 83 seats? Suppose we give them 50 in Ontario. No, suppose we don't. The most they've ever had in Ontario was 22 in the last election. Before that, it was 17. Even if people have forgotten Bob Rae, they're not going to get 50. But if that doesn't happen, how many can they get in the Atlantic provinces? I don't know, 12 maybe? And then out west, that's not looking good for them. Saskatchewan may be the heartland, but they don't win there anymore. They'll pick up some seats in BC, but mathematically, it's just really hard to see how this is going to happen. And it's really hard to believe they're not going to start bleeding support in Quebec. So yeah, miracles can happen. Alberta elected an NDP government. But the fact of the matter is, the NDP is looking at a long, painful night tonight.
Welcome back. This is our first day in our new studio. We're going to have 1-hour shows from Flowing TV from the studio going forward. We thought we would launch the new studio on election night, and it's turning into a very momentous night for Canada and for conservatives like us. Look, the votes haven't fully been counted, but there can be no doubt that the most powerful political party in Canada today is the media party. I laughed out loud today as I was reading journalist summaries of the turning points of the campaign, as if there was a key moment, a breakthrough, or some gaffe that determined the result tonight. There were no turning points in the campaign. It was trench warfare, where every day the consensus media had one goal: stop Harper. I suppose the turning point was when they decided that Thomas Mulcair was the least likely of the two challengers to accomplish their objectives. So that was a turning point. They chose Trudeau over him, but that wasn't external. That was a media party decision. Oh, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. I'm talking about the palpably biased coverage every day. The most obvious example was the flood the zone media coverage given of the Mike Duffy trial. For weeks, there was no other issue treated during the election. I don't dispute that a criminal trial involving a senator who was also an avid conservative campaigner, I'm not disputing that's news. That it was the only news for weeks, though, can only be explained by the mission of stopping Harper. But for what? A senator who had $90,000 of questionable expenses and he didn't want to pay them back, so out of exasperation, a Harper staffer just cut a check to repay the government? That's the biggest scandal of 9 years of conservative government, someone paying from his own money to the government? Okay, but sure, let's accept the media party premise that it's a huge scandal. So where was the equivalent coverage of the NDP scandal involving $2.75 million of taxpayer money illegally diverted from parliamentary budgets to set up satellite NDP offices around Canada? That's not an allegation. That's not yet unproven. That's a conviction. And the NDP hasn't paid it back. Where was the analogous flood the zone coverage for that? Or here's another example. Remember this guy, Earl Cowan? He was so mad at the media's bias on the Duffy matter that he heckled them once. He said they were biased. He swore at them. Oh, the media feasted on him for a week. And fair enough. I mean, no one must criticize the critics. What better fun than to mock an unpolished old conservative and then to try and dig up everything they could find about him online to dox him, as it's called. But how about this story from the weekend when Liberal partisans literally assaulted a BC journalist named Bob Mackin, literally asking, pushing him, shoving him, because he was asking a top Liberal organizer tough questions. Here, take a look. If Earl Cowan was newsworthy for a week, why wasn't...
Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan, don't touch me. I'm in public. I'm in public. This is public space. We don't want to be disturbed, okay? I'm in public, sir. I'm in public. We're in public. This is Canada. This is democracy. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Stop touching me. Who are you?
If Earl Cowan was news for a week, why wasn't that Liberal partisan mob physically attacking Bob Mackin. Oh, and by the way, what were those liberals pushing Bob Mackin about? What questions didn't they like him asking? Well, you wouldn't know if you relied on the media party. You'd have to read Hong Kong's leading English newspaper, the South China Morning Post, to find out about it. They had a bombshell story 3 weeks ago now about how a criminal suspect in China named Michael Ching has become a senior organizer and fundraiser in Canada for Justin Trudeau. How he helped set up a series of Trudeau youth clubs, the True Fans, strong links to the Communist Party of China. That's huge news. Huge news in Hong Kong's largest English newspaper, but it was thrown down the memory hole by Canada's media party because it got in the way of their chief objective, not reporting the news, defeating Stephen Harper. Do you think I'm overdoing this? Do you think this is sour grapes or something? Do you think I'm making excuses for Stephen Harper? No. I'm under no illusion that Harper is perfect. But 100 small examples of media coverage all point in the same direction. They only point in the same direction. Remember that goofy case of the Tory candidate caught peeing in a coffee cup in someone's house? Huge media story. He was fired as a candidate. Well, it turns out that a Liberal candidate in Quebec, Mark Pedersen, peed outside in public between giving handshakes to people. Weird, gross story, not important. Not an important policy story, other than a Quebec talk show and 1 or 2 Quebec newspapers. The whole thing was thrown down the memory hole, too. Again, I'm not saying that peeing is an important political story. I don't think it is. But the media party did when it was a Tory, just like heckling journalists was huge news when it was a Tory. 100 examples. Could it all really be random? No, as I reported last month, the largest journalists' union in Canada, the Canadian Media Guild, that represents thousands of Canadian journalists, including those at the CBC and Canadian Press, they are a registered anti-Harper campaign group with Elections Canada. The CBC and Canadian Press journalists you see reporting each night, they are also paying from their own money, through their union dues, to defeat Stephen Harper in the election. That's a conflict of interest of the highest order. That would be like if a referee were cheering for a team, which is precisely why no other media reported on this conflict of interest. Oh, by the way, there are literally dozens of these super PAC-style lobby groups campaigning in Canada against Harper, including one registered in New York City. You never heard of it? Of course you didn't, because they're against Stephen Harper. If the NRA, the U.S. gun lobby, were running a campaign against Trudeau in our election, do you think it would have received 100 stories or 200 stories? Look, I don't know tonight's result. I think the Liberals are trying to repeat Obama's 2008 feat, replacing George W. Bush with Obama in a burst of celebrity and youthful enthusiasm. They haven't even hid that fact. I mean, here's David Axelrod, Obama's senior campaign advisor from 2008, tweeting his support for Trudeau. That's the least of it. A half dozen Obama staff came up to Canada to actually help campaign, run the campaign. That wasn't well reported either, but the media party ran 100 false stories about an Australian dirty trickster named Linton Crosby that Harper allegedly brought in to run the campaign. Yeah, except it wasn't true. But George W. Bush had fatigued the country in 2 wars, and 2008 was the start of the Great Recession. And most importantly, Barack Obama would become America's first black president, an enormous symbol of potential social healing. But Stephen Harper ended our war in Afghanistan. Our military involvement against ISIS is very small and very popular. Stephen Harper brought us out of the Great Recession and gave us the strongest economy in the G7. The Harper derangement syndrome, a copy of Bush derangement syndrome, has no basis. Ask anyone why they hate Harper. They'll tell you he's a dictator, a fascist. Really? Just stop and listen to the crazy. And Trudeau is no Obama. Obama was light on accomplishment, but he was still a U.S. senator. He was a lawyer, a law professor, but he had the promise of racial reconciliation. What's Trudeau? His one book, a campaign autobiography, was ghostwritten. He was a professional playboy touring the world on his dad's trust fund account. What symbolic victory does he represent for Canada? Other than nepotism, that your last name matters, that where you're from matters, that celebrity is more important than accomplishment. That's what's been the worst thing about this campaign. Trudeau has said a half dozen things, any one of which should have disqualified him. His comment that budgets balance themselves, that then they shouldn't balance themselves, that Trudeau intends to hike payroll taxes, that he intends to quit our NATO alliance against ISIS. He truly is a spoiled child who decided at age 40 that he should get a job and Prime Minister is his by right. That just might happen tonight. In fact, I think it will. And if it does, millions of Canadians caught up in Trudeau's second-rate pseudo-celebrity will soon come to miss Stephen Harper. Oh, they won't admit it. They won't admit it. They'll still hate Harper himself and pride themselves on the viciousness of that hate. No, but they'll miss Harper's balanced budgets and his low taxes and his constitutional peace with Quebec and the record of national security and safety that Harper has brought. We'll find out tonight. Thanks for being with us on this exciting night for The Rebel. More after these messages.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to TheRebel.media/TheMegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Getting hiccups like being caught checking my earpieces as we come live. Hamish Marshall with Ezra Levant and I now. Hamish, curling term comes to mind as we look at the results from Atlantic Canada. Sweep. Absolutely. And the other term, hard.
Absolutely. This is looking like a big Liberal sweep in Atlantic Canada. The Conservatives held half the seats in the region going into tonight, but right now we're looking at the Liberals winning out of 32 seats, probably 30, maybe 31, maybe even 32. There's one chance with the NDP hanging on to a seat in Newfoundland, and there's one or two Conservative seats they might be able to hold on to in New Brunswick.
Prominent, and I'll let Ezra jump in a second, but prominent New Democrats in areas that normally vote NDP losing as well. Megan Leslie trailing badly. I mean, this is a woman who is on the NDP front bench. She is prominent in speaking at the media. She's constantly on political panels. She has a real voice and a real presence in Parliament. Swept aside in favor of the red change.
And not by a little bit either. It looks like she lost by close to 20 points. Peter Stauffer, a longtime NDP MP.
Champion of veterans.
Absolutely, also gone in this red tide. Now remember in 1993, the Liberals also had a big red sweep through Atlantic Canada, but Atlantic Canada is its own place. So even though the Liberals are having a great night in Atlantic Canada tonight, it doesn't necessarily mean the same trends are going to continue across the country.
I got a question. I mean, Atlantic Canada, it seems to me as a Western boy now in Toronto, it likes champions. I mean, Peter MacKay was a champion for his region within the government. He wasn't running again. Danny Williams, who was seen as a Newfoundland chauvinist in the good meaning of that term, said anybody but Harper. Was there anyone running for the Conservatives who could say, no, I will be a champion for you in the next Harper term? So was it a love for Liberals? Was it a lack of Conservative champions? Or was this just unite the left happening big time?
Well, I think the only really big Conservative champion left in the region was Bernard Valcourt, senior Conservative minister in northwestern New Brunswick. He's right now running third in his riding. I think that the people in Atlantic Canada saw where the tide was going, saw the polls predicting a Liberal government, and moved that way en masse. They want to magnify their voice.
They've been big behind the Liberals for a while.
Absolutely.
But these numbers, I mean, close to 50% for a long time saying they would vote Liberal. But right now, they're running much higher than that.
Much higher. I mean, we're looking at them winning some of these seats with 75, 80% of the vote. Even in areas that have traditionally done well, we've never seen them done this well before.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that we're going to see it, we're about to hit the Quebec border.
Right.
Things change at the Quebec border, then things change again at the Ontario border, and then the Ontario-Manitoba border. So this is one of the 5 regional races that I've been talking about all campaign. You can't look at national numbers. It's regional. What do you expect to see in Quebec? I was speaking with Eric Jahame today. He says he's still thinking that the Conservatives could pick up 15 to 20.
Well, I think that might be a little ambitious for the Conservatives, but there's certainly a group of seats around Quebec City, many of which the Conservatives held in the last couple of parliaments that they're probably going to be able to win back. I think the Conservatives who won 5 in the last election in Quebec City, or in the Quebec area, could end up maybe at 8 or at 10 if it's a good night for them.
Let me ask you this, Hamish. The niqab issue was really unifying for most Canadians, according to polls, including the poll that you did. But every poll showed that the support for banning niqabs in citizenship ceremonies, I never saw a poll putting support for the ban less than 78%.
Right.
And in Quebec, I saw your poll that said francophones support the ban up to 94%. That, I think, Thomas Mulcair throwing himself against that rock probably dashed his support in Quebec, which reduced his national numbers, and that started the vicious cycle. But it didn't pay off for him anywhere. I mean, he lost Quebec.
He didn't pick up support in Toronto or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's my question. Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, in their final week campaign messaging, were 100% economy. All the ads I saw, all the brochures, if this was such a winner for the Conservatives, was this card being played anywhere? Why did they avoid it?
Well, I think what they found is that the niqab issue worked well in Quebec, and it worked well with the Conservative base, but it wasn't encouraging new voters to come to the Conservatives. In many ways, it stopped some of the bleeding that we saw earlier in the campaign. The Conservatives at one point were at 3rd in the polls. They sort of came back up from that, but it wasn't a growth agent beyond that.
But it might be in Quebec. We'll find out.
We'll see in Quebec. And the other thing it did in Quebec is it breathed new life into the Bloc. And the Bloc was moribund. Everybody was saying the Bloc was going to win 1 seat. I think the Bloc will win 5, 7, maybe 8 seats because they've gone back up as the NDP has dropped, and that gives them all sorts of interesting possibilities across rural Quebec.
Brian, last word to you.
All right. What do you think we're going to see when we get to Ontario? I think that, the Liberals told me a little while ago that they wanted to win and play to win everywhere Kathleen Wynne held a seat. That'd be close to 70 in this province. Are they going to hit that?
I think 70 is pretty ambitious for the Liberals, but I could certainly see them in the 60-seat range. The Conservatives on the new boundaries, we've got new boundaries in this election. Conservatives would have won 83 seats in the last election. I think we're probably going to see them drop back to somewhere in the mid-40s. That kind of a drop to push the Liberals somewhere up into the high 50s. If they win a few off the New Democrats, I think we could see them 59, 60, 62 seats, somewhere in there.
All right. Hamish Marshall, thanks so much. Where are we heading next, guys? We are off to what? We're talking about the economy. Okay, back with you in a minute.
Canadians get that given the turmoil in the world, the fact that we have a budget balance and we're going to keep that balance is a good thing for this country.
Our first budget will be a balanced budget.
We are not going to make political promises of balancing the budgets when we know that we are right now in deficit.
Trudeau's deficits will not be small. Mr. Trudeau has made tens of billions of dollars of spending promises.
We have the best track record for balanced budgets of any party in Canada.
The choice is between keeping the benefits you have under us and getting more, or having them taken away under the Liberals and getting deficits instead.
But he'll run he says, a modest deficit, a tiny deficit. So small you can hardly see the deficit. Only for 3 years. Only for 3 deficits.
The NDP has a clear plan to create jobs, to stimulate the economy. An NDP government will support Canada's vital tourism industry with an investment of $30 million.
Large corporations are going to start paying their fair share.
The Liberal Party plan is to drop small business taxes from 11 to 9%. It's an investment of almost $6 billion over the next 4 years and almost $20 billion over the next decade. We'll invest $200 million. The difference between the plan that we're putting forward and the plan that Mr. Mulcair is putting forward is our plan is real. His plan, he's not going to be able to pay for it.
This is the only idea that any of these guys have in the economy. Let's just spend more on everything.
But in order to grow the Canadian economy, we need to invest in the middle class and invest in our future in partnership with provinces and municipalities.
The real threat to the middle class is what Justin's Liberals and the NDP are proposing. They want tens of billions of extra spending dollars to funnel to their special interest groups.
All right, so there's some thoughts. You heard from all the leaders on the economy. This was supposed to be the election about the economy. Brian Lilley, Ezra Levant here in our new studio with our new Liberal buddy and guest, old Liberal buddy.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So I don't mean the old part. Let me ask
Gray
you about
hair.
this. The economy central to this. There were three competing visions. One said, keep the budget balanced. Don't raise taxes, keep taxes low, we're doing well, we're doing better than our competitors. That's the Conservative message. Then the NDP was, we'll balance the budget, we'll do a lot more spending, and everything's going to be rosy.
Yeah.
The Liberals flanked the NDP to the left. They took a page out of Kathleen Wynne's book. It looks like it's paying off for them. Is that the Liberal Party that you used to know?
No, I mean, the Liberal Party clearly took a position of saying in the past, in 1993, when Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien came forth with the Red Book, the one that frankly got me elected, that they would in fact ensure that any type of cuts, any type of expenditures would be met with a corresponding growth in the economy. That side of the equation isn't necessarily here yet. And of course, we have to also look at where we're looking to make those investments. If I understand the proposal by Justin Trudeau, the leader of the Liberal Party, much of that will be in the area of social programming.
A third of it. You know, I was talking about this for a couple of weeks, and then Andrew Coyne picked it up, a couple of others. A third of that $60 billion infrastructure program is social spending.
And we have to recognize an aging population, greater demands. You have to have some kind of way in which to provide growth in the economy. Right now, the number one area
But
of
he
growth,
sold it as infrastructure, and most of us think what you guys used to do, what the Conservatives have been doing, roads and bridges.
Remember, I had Janet Ecker and Jim Flaherty as my provincial counterparts in Ontario riding, Pickering, Ajax, and Whitby. We also had the ability to cut expenditures and cut back on provincial transfers in order to meet those budgetary commitments. Canadians wanted that to happen. They certainly welcomed what had occurred. But I think this is different. The circumstance we have now is you're saying you're going to make investments to stimulate the economy with what is not a lot of money, but from a banking perspective or from an international perspective, $10 billion a year could mean higher interest rates for mortgage holders, for people who are looking on consumer credit. What I'm more concerned about, I think, right now, and it's going to be very difficult to figure this out, is if the totality of revenues being generated by the number one generator in this country, oil and gas, is not there. How are you going to make up the difference? You can't, with $10 billion, expect that you're going to be able to do all the things, bring the economy back to where it is. Now, the fact that it's held out this long is quite impressive. I mean, we are at a pretty good stage where we are right now, but Canadians clearly want to change, and it looks like they're going to try to exercise that this evening.
You mentioned oil and
gas. Well, I know that was a file that you followed very closely when you were an MP. Justin Trudeau has come out clearly against the Northern Gateway pipeline. That has gone through the National Energy Board. It was approved with conditions. That, speaking of infrastructure, that's a $7-8 billion shovel-ready private sector jobs creator that feels pretty dead right now. Trudeau's being more vague on Energy East. Some would say he says different messages. The one pipeline he says he supports is the Keystone XL, but that's, you know, it's been stopped by Barack Obama. So do you think that now that I think he's going to be Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau's going to be Prime Minister, do you think that the burdens of actually governing will be a lot different than the really elevated punditry of being the third-party leader? Or is that just too hot an issue for him to abandon? Do you think he's going to move towards the center on pipelines if he becomes PM?
I think he has to. I mean, the reality is that without pipelines, without access to getting our oil to the international market, someone else will sell it to us at a much cheaper price. We're going to wind up in a situation where, economically speaking, I think the revenues won't be there. If I look at the recent budgetary announcement by Notley's government in Alberta, you know, only one in four oil wells and natural gas wells are actually producing revenue. They're actually paying royalties. The rest are not. We have nowhere to put our oil, and frankly, the world does want it. But if Canada's not prepared to get it to waterborne markets, then what's going to happen? More jobs lost, more dislocation. How are you going to pay for the social programs in this country, let alone the promises that everyone's made?
And I want to ask you about the social programs, because we're going to have you back later to talk specifically about energy. But on that social program, $60 billion over 10 years. Realistically, not a ton of money, but $20 billion of that new social programs wants to set up things like a national daycare program. I don't think there's enough money in there for it. I think that when you create these programs, it creates demand. That's what Quebec saw. I think that Stephen Harper's right when he said, if you vote for this Liberal infrastructure plan, you're voting for systemic deficits because you're going to create a big new apparatus. It's not about putting up a daycare building, it's about creating a system.
There's no doubt that there will be a deficit. There is no doubt that this will, do something to impact the national finances. My concern is what you back this up on. Do you believe that by making those investments, social programs or otherwise, that you're somehow going to float or stimulate the economy? The reality is what we're seeing on the oil side in and of itself cannot be met by that small amount. What my other concern is if a country begins to go down this road of entering into spending which cannot be met by any responsible stimulus in the economy, you may very well wind up with higher interest rates. Consumer credit cards, mortgage rates. I'm not sounding the panic button. I'm simply saying, considering the circumstances, we don't know what the books are, and I'm waiting for someone to come out and say, the first day they see the books, say, well, this wasn't, this is worse than we thought. That traditional sort of thing that we get when someone takes over government. What has been proposed, if it was for partisan reasons, the reality is that this is not like 1993, where we did have a serious problem. Unemployment was very high. We knew that there were structural deficits. Many of them have been eliminated. Do we want to go back down that road at a time when we know that the national finances of this country, our ability to generate wealth is nowhere near what it was on a per capita basis just a few years ago?
There's such a thing as winning too big of a majority. I know that sounds crazy, and I'm not even saying that Trudeau's necessarily going to win a majority, but when you sweep Atlantic Canada, and if that's replicated in other parts, it's possible he'll win a majority, hopes are high, especially from people who perhaps in their mind demonize Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, maybe even a little bit worse than the facts would support. And so if expectations are high, and Justin Trudeau, I mean, in many ways, people projected onto him their hopes for anything. I wonder if he can live up to those hopes. And I'm speaking as if he's the Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, we won't know for a few more minutes. I mean, I saw Atlantic Canada in 1988, very strongly in favor. I was running the campaign for Derek Lee at the time, and we did a very good job in Atlantic Canada, but it stopped in Quebec. We'll see if that happens. But to whom much is given, much is expected. And in this circumstance, I think that not only will he have a wealth of members of Parliament, perhaps more than he can possibly handle, we'll see what the evening comes out with. The reality is that he's going to have to live up to a lot of expectations. There's a variety of reasons why people supported him, and all of them, I suspect, are not necessarily complimentary. I'm a critic, as you know, of the Liberals, very tough critic, but why don't you speak positively? Tell me who you think the most competent, most able people, and we haven't seen what's happening in Ontario and Quebec yet, but if there were people who might shepherd the country, might be the next finance minister. Chrystia Freeland is a name that's mentioned. That makes me nervous because her expertise is not in economics or business.
Well, and the economists that she looks up to are socialists.
I think you're going to have to look at some of the people where you have some strengths. You have people who have experiences. Ralph Goodale comes out as a name, obviously, a lot of experience, well-rounded, well-liked,
and more moderate, fairly
moderate from the
fellow.
West, energy savant. I understood. There may be others. John McCallum to a lesser extent. We've got perhaps if Bill Blair wins, a new Solicitor General, Veterans Affairs, Andrew Leslie. I'm not sure how this is all going to break down.
If someone comes from Alberta, maybe an energy minister.
Sure,
maybe an energy minister.
Anne McClellan became our justice minister over time. Eventually, we had 4 seats back in 1993 when we had our so-called sweep. And I think there's a lot of names that we've not heard from. It's a crop of very new individuals. I kind of felt that I'm 53 now. but when I was told that they didn't necessarily want me to run this time, I thought, gee, it can't be because I'm 51. I hope it's an age thing. It's the gray hair. It always comes back to that.
You know what? I mean, I want to make sure that I'm not projecting my worst fears, because hopefully the grown-ups will prevail and the burden of responsibility. And again,
You're more optimistic than me then, Ezra.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if these polls hold, he certainly has expectations, and I have no doubt there'll be a honeymoon. Let me ask you one last question before we go to a breakdown. My thesis that I just did in my rant was that the media is having a bit of a love affair. Maybe it's Trudeau Mania Part 2. Maybe it's they just didn't like Stephen Harper anymore. I don't know. But do you think that what do you think the media is going to be like, especially on economic issues, for the next 6-12 months? Total honeymoon?
Oh, it'll be a total honeymoon. It's a relief. People say it's a new day. Depends on the strength of the majority. There may be a lot of people in the media right now who might wind up being one of those working with a future minister.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's the pool.
You know, I got to tell you this. I've had stories over the years, but the one that I'll never forget is one of the very great reporters in this country I've got a lot of respect for. I went to their home, and sure enough, there was a wall. I mean, it looked like a cathedral more than anything else, but it was a mosaic, and on it was all pictures of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So,
oh my God!
And they're giving objective
a shrine.
opinions.
It sounds like a shrine.
It was a shrine.
Oh,
I took over a desk once. So I was replacing a reporter. I got to the desk. I had to take down posters of Castro.
Come on, come on.
I'm kidding.
You sure wasn't Che Guevara?
No, well, I don't remember Che being there, but I had to take down posters of Castro. And it was not done in irony. This was a love for Castro and his Cuba. So, look, the media runs left. I've been in trouble from some people saying that recently, and I just asked them, how many scrums have you been to? The one thing I learned early when the Harper government took over was, if you wanted to knock them off their game, ask a question from the right, because they weren't expecting it, such as, well, why does this program exist? They were ready to defend every program, never answer why it should exist.
I've done my fair share with media, and you have a pretty good idea where everyone's coming from at the end of the day. I mean, we all have our own biases. In my case, I'm a central Liberal, perhaps out of step with the move to the left Liberal Party, but I think it's critical to know that the reflection is also the media, and they tend to have a lot of say. I don't disagree with what you've said in terms of having their own biases to the extent that they can organize it. I mean, it's clear from the outset that there were a lot of media that were interested in having a change, and they may very well be successful in getting that change across.
Well, you're a good sport for coming to us. We're the new media, and to our viewers, I mean, I just glanced in the break there at our viewer numbers, an absolute record for people clicking on our website. And I appreciate you being here. I mean, we're going to have little bumps in the road. I mean, we're starting on an exciting night, but it's only going to get better. This studio, by the way, completely crowdfunded by our viewers. So I wanted to put in that plug and say thank you for giving us this. And I think that our little rebel will be important to give scrutiny. I promise that we will not be part of the honeymoon. Hopefully we can bring our game up and be honest, skeptical, critical journalists, asking the tough questions, but being fair. And Dan, you're part of that. You've been part of that tonight. Here's a little break, and we'll be back in a moment to talk again about energy, my favorite subject. Come right back.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to TheRebel.media/TheMegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Back here at the Rebel.media headquarters in the new studio, paid for by you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Hamish Marshall with me again. We've been watching the red sweep across Atlantic Canada. Polls about to close in Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and we're going to hit Saskatchewan and Alberta. See, I was shocked at that. I thought Alberta would close a bit later, along with British Columbia. So we're going to, see most of the results from the country in they'll start coming in about 20 minutes time, and then polls closing in British Columbia shortly after that. But you want to talk about a couple of the specific ridings in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Okay, so Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, two very populous tree provinces. I drove through last year. It's all I saw, trees. Let's talk about Central Nova. What's happening there? It's Peter MacKay's old riding.
Peter MacKay's held this seat from 1997, long-time Tory seat. His father held it before him. Tonight, the Liberals have taken it easily, defeating Fred Delory, a former director of political operations for the Conservative Party, who went back down to Nova Scotia in order to run.
From Nova Scotia, but like many people had gone to Ottawa to work to, partake in the political process. Maybe they saw him as a parachute. Maybe they just wanted part of the wave. How big are the numbers there?
It looks like the Liberals are going to win it by about 35%. It's
Wow.
about 59% to 25. It's an absolute blowout.
Okay, next riding you wanted to bring up.
Next riding we'll talk about is Miramichi Grand Lake. Now this is an interesting seat. It's a seat that traditionally had a long Liberal tradition, but it's a rural, largely Anglophone New Brunswick seat that sort of should be conservative. And the demographics should be conservatives. And when Stephen Harper's party won it recently, the Tories didn't even win it in '84. Well, the Liberals have taken it back. Now, not as big a victory for them. They won it by 15%, but it's a clear victory tonight.
Okay, and the third riding?
Moncton.
Moncton. Okay, so this is urban New Brunswick.
Yep.
Okay.
Majority a truly bilingual city. It's a sort of a real bellwether swing seat in Atlantic Canada. When the Conservatives won it last time, that was an indication they were going on for a majority. Again, the Liberals have won it by over 30% of the vote. So it swung hugely back, and the Conservative incumbent only ended up with about 20% of the vote.
Okay, so last time I looked, it was leading or elected in 32. What's your prediction now?
Well,
is it going to be all 32 going red, or are they going to give up a couple to the NDP or the Conservatives?
There's one seat in western New Brunswick, Tobique-Mactaquac. It was a very forestry-focused Upper St. John Valley riding with a long Conservative tradition, and right now that's absolutely neck and neck. So I think
Bernard Valcour's riding?
No, it was a fellow called Mike Allen, but he stepped down, and there's a new candidate running. So it's extremely close. We'll see what ends up happening. As I said before, Valcour is actually running in third in Madawaska-Restigouche.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, and then is that the only one that people are coming close to challenging the Liberals?
It looks like that. There's an outside chance the Conservatives could take Fundy Royal, which is a seat they've held since 1997.
Wow, absolutely shocking. All right, so we're going to see results from Ontario and Quebec in a little while. Your prediction for Ontario, for the Conservatives, about 40-odd seats in the 40 range. What do you think is going to happen with the NDP? I've been all over downtown Toronto the last couple days. It looks like solid NDP territory, but the polls would have you believe the Liberals are going to sweep.
Well, I mean, downtown Toronto is going to be fascinating. I think the NDP are going to hang on to their strongholds in Hamilton, in Windsor. They'll be able to hold on to places like that. But some of those swing NDP Liberal seats in Toronto, Davenport, University, Rosedale, there's a lot of these seats where the Liberals are having a good night. We can see the orange turn a shade of red.
I'll be shocked if Peggy Nash loses this time because I think that she's been running a strong campaign locally. I know she won, then she lost, and she won again. But I'll be surprised.
Well, and it's a seat that the provincial Liberals picked up from the NDP in the last election. So
well, there you go.
Keep your eyes on that
There's
one.
that Kathleen Wynne playbook operating again at the federal level. Brian Lilley, Hamish Marshall here at Rebel Media headquarters. Back after this.
Mr. Harper continues to say, we can't do anything on the environment because we'll hurt the economy.
We are the first government in history to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also growing our economy.
We are committed to working with the provinces to reduce emissions.
Make polluters pay for the pollution they create.
Carbon tax is not about reducing emissions. It's a front.
Getting our resources to market is critical.
He cannot get our exports to market.
The exports have increased. We've also seen an increase in uranium exports and coal exports and others to Asia.
I'm also against the Keystone XL pipeline for one very good and simple reason. I believe that the way to develop our natural resources is to do it sustainably.
40,000 Canadian jobs would be exported to the United States with Keystone XL.
This is the real view of the NDP. Leave the resources in the ground. By the way, it's also, in a practical matter, the view of the Liberals, because whenever there is a controversy, the Trudeau Liberals always come out and oppose the project.
He has made the oil sands an international pariah.
We'll enforce overarching sustainable development legislation.
We're investing heavily in green energy, about $1 billion a year.
We will go to Paris for the climate change conference with all premiers.
All right, welcome back. You heard the leaders there on energy, central issue. Dan, you were saying earlier energy is central to the economy, but what we kept hearing from Mulcair and Trudeau, and I think a lot of people outside of Alberta believed it, was Stephen Harper put all of Canada's economic eggs in one basket, and then he dropped the basket. It's what, about 6% of GDP?
Yeah, about 5-6%. It depends, of course, my lesson.
It's an important 5 or 6%.
It is. I mean, and we look at crude development as if it's something terrible. We have quadrupled the amount of crude that we are producing in this country just in the past 15 years. Much of that in very capital-intensive projects, Athabasca, St. Crude, take your pick. The reality, however, is that why wouldn't you go there? The rest of the world did. We got to $130, $120, $142 a barrel back in 2008. That's where the world was heading, and there wasn't anybody out there saying at the time crude didn't have a future. It still has one here in Canada.
But I mean, this idea that we were becoming a petro state, the petrodollar, and it was going to ruin the rest of the economy, I don't think Ontario has suffered. I don't think the other provinces have suffered from exploring and exploiting the natural resources that we have and doing it responsibly.
Well, I think reimportation had a lot more to do with what happened to manufacturing and the shift to finances here in Ontario, in Toronto in particular. These shifts were not inevitable, but they were nevertheless took the United States, Canada, much of the manufacturing that we saw here was transported to other parts of the world, cheaper domains, cheaper jurisdictions.
I'll let Ezra in a second because this is really Ezra's beat, but I got one last question, and that is, during one of the leaders' debates, Elizabeth May said, we can't have, in opposition to the Energy East pipeline, we can't have oil tankers in the St. Lawrence.
Why not?
We already do, don't we? To import the oil from other countries?
What's the point? I mean, if you're saying that somehow vessels don't travel, there's thousands of them at any given time.
Paul Martin owned a lot of them.
Of course. I wish I had one. I think I go in with a 20 horsepower on the back. But the reality is that this is the way in which you transport fluids and products. And it's not just oil, it's goods, it's a number of other very important items. And whether it's coming from Europe, we get a lot of our gasoline from Europe. Or by pipeline, or by rail.
I used to go by on my way to work at a factory when I was going through school, the docks where they unloaded the soybeans that a lot of the Green Party supporters eat. And the smell was horrible. You know, if that got into the lake, you wouldn't want it.
Well, you know what? Here's, I think, what happened. Is Harper derangement syndrome turned into derangement about anything Harper seemed to support. So the oil sands became demonized.
Kind of a proxy.
Yeah, and you're so right, Brian. I saw in the debates people saying Harper put all our eggs in the oil basket. What eggs? These pipelines are private sector projects. The tens, over $100 billion.
By the way, a lot of them built here in Ontario.
Yeah.
Quebec.
Yeah. So, I mean, if someone said, hey, Harper, don't put all our eggs in the big three auto basket, I know what they would mean because the government of Canada cut a huge check to help bail them out. But the government of Canada is not spending any money on these pipelines or these oil sands. The flow goes the other way. It's the tax and the revenue. So I think there's sort of a madness, and it was repeated so many times it became conventional wisdom. Oil is bad. And I understand why Mulcair and Trudeau jumped on that bandwagon. Why not? It was a way to bash Harper. But like I said before, I'm worried that with Trudeau, if he gets to be in office, which I think he will be, how do you, I mean, it's Rachel Notley's problem too. Yep. You demonize something, how do you embrace it?
Well, the point is, what are you going to do? Allow another country, Nigeria, and Iraq, whoever to produce
Russia,
without any,
Iran.
but without any with any type of environmental considerations. Look, you don't dump on the thing that is really your generator of wealth and revenue. And I think we can do this in a way. I don't know how they're going to suggest that you can do climate change at the same time and continue down the road of ensuring you have proper exploitation of products. But we have a serious problem in the country in terms of being able to say to ourselves, hey, we can do without that, and we can just pretend these things are going to happen on their own. They will not. And the reality is that someone from the West, hopefully a liberal from the West, will come up and say, look, these are the realities that we live in. Yes, the United States has a problem with Keystone because they believe that it's dirty oil going to theirs, through their jurisdiction, out to ships in the U.S. Gulf Coast and around the world. They don't want to talk about the fact that Alaskan oil, slope oil, is a lot dirtier, creates a lot more sulfur. Well, yeah, California, what little they make. But
it's funny because I'm nervous about Gerald Butts. I don't know the man at all other than by reputation, but I know that he was a brainchild behind Dalton McGuinty's green energy strategy, which has resulted in very high power prices, shutting down the coal-fired power plant. It was a clean coal pipe, shut it down. And I'm worried that utopianism, I don't think that Gerald Butts is evil. I just think he's a true ideological believer, and he's going to try to do what he did in Ontario nationwide.
Well, I don't know of the man's background in terms of what he is capable of doing. It's clear that he had some issues with some members, that is, Trudeau had members of his own team that ran into some trouble with respect to the Trans-Canada pipelines, advising them on who to talk to in order to get that pipeline approved. Back to Gerald, though, I think there's a lot of people who may share his view. It's getting there that's going to be the problem. When these things become fully known, we may find ourselves in a situation where, politicians, newly minted members of Parliament who be elected tonight, are going to have to start to think about that person, that widow who has to look after the electrical costs to their apartment, to their house, which they're not going to be able to afford given the $40 and $50 increases that we're seeing, whether it's to renew the infrastructure of electricity in the grid here in Ontario or across the country. I saw it with propane 2 years ago. I saw it with natural gas a few years back. Someone is going to have to understand that there's a very, very fine relationship, a symbiotic relationship between affordability and being able to make these programs viable. But on the current circumstance, the construct here in Ontario, it's been ruinous and very, very destructive to a lot of, not just businesses, but to a lot of consumers.
Dan, I know one of the things that you do is you watch the gas prices. So
of course, yeah.
Okay, so it's tomorrow's gas prices today?
Tomorrow's gas prices today. Well, I speak with Gas Buddy, yes, and
okay,
of course, tomorrow's gasprices.com.
All right, let's talk about one of the issues here. As everyone's talked about Alberta Oil, the two Quebec-based leaders have said at various times, well, we've got to run a pipeline from west to east. And then when that was proposed, they opposed it. Part of the problem that we have in this country is a lack of refining. People keep saying, well, keep the jobs in Canada, refine the oil here. Find me a place where we can get a refinery built in this country.
NIMBYism is there. I mean, they shut the one down.
It's NIMBYism and it's regulation.
Well, regulation. So the last major refinery before we shut the one in Dartmouth down, and that created a 5-day shortage, by the way, in gasoline in Nova Scotia. Now that we're importing all that gasoline to the Atlantic Basin, the one before that was a Shell refinery in Montreal. They had produced enough energy for places like here in Toronto, all the way out to up to the north, the Bay of Angawa. The reality is that Shell refinery shut down because it needed to be remodeled, refit. They needed a new investor. And the investor was prepared to come forward. I know the parties. They came before the parliamentary committee, the industry committee, and said, yeah, we're kind of interested in buying this. One problem. The province of Quebec has said, as a condition, that once you transfer ownership from one company to another, you have to pay for remediation. In this case, it was $90 million. The margins simply weren't there, so they shut down the mothballed the plant. You and I and everybody else are now paying an extra 3 cents a liter as a result of the shutdown of that refinery. So people don't mind. If you want to go that route, that's great. But understand, there's no alternative. There's no one out there driving, another form of energy that will be equivalent to what we need currently to keep our economy going. And that's what I think is, you've got to meet the short term in order to get the long term, what they're talking about when they're talking about green and other things. The reality is that you're imposing this, and it's unfortunately a very, very significant hit.
Poverty in various ways, like they have in Europe.
Well, you're hurting consumers in a country that has a lot of energy.
One of the things I'm worried about is Gerald Butts, and again, I refer to him because he is the chief strategist, chief speechwriter, chief policy boss. Like he may be the chief of staff for the Prime Minister. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. He was part of that global climate change jet set. Would go to UN conventions here, and the Paris Convention on Global Warming is that big thing coming up. And it's one thing to go and pop champagne corks and issue press releases, but then to implement that creates, that's the problem Alberta has, is we know Rachel Notley's going to bring in some changes to royalty rates and climate change policy. In the meantime, there's a capital strike. If you had $1 billion kicking around, Dan, would you invest in Alberta before you knew?
How could you?
And I'm worried that capital strike will be emphasized and deepened because New York and Hong Kong and London, all the money markets are going to say, whoa, you want us to put more money in the oil and gas industry while you've got Notley and Trudeau tinkering? See you guys in 5 years.
Remember, when it comes to gasoline prices and what it's going to cost consumers and what it does for the Canadian economy, the other hit will be to the Canadian currency. If we can't get our crude to market, we're going to continue to see our devaluation of the Canadian dollar. We price all of our commodities, don't care, food, gasoline, commodities, in U.S. terms.
Right.
No investments, no crude continues to devalue, and what happens? Well, then you wind up in a situation where you simply see an economy that is frittering, and it's unfortunate that we're not recognizing the importance of getting crude to market. I recognize that there are issues that are out there, but if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin is in a race. I mean, he can, I tell you, he and the Saudis and Americans are pretty much tied in first place for oil production. He's racing to get to China before we do.
Yep.
And the fact that we're not building a pipeline to China means he will meet
production is down this year from 6.3 down to 5.9. What does that mean? $500 million, about $20 million a day in revenue and job creation in Canada. It's significant.
The Russians are already signing energy agreements. We should be signing with China. We should be signing energy agreements with India. That was part of the India trade agreement that was announced a little while ago, happened as the price of oil was starting to crater. But if we can't get to Tidewater, that won't happen. The trade missions that Chrétien used to go on,
we're all
those will take on a very different flavor if it's Justin Trudeau going over. I don't think he'll be trying to push Canadian oil into energy-hungry markets.
But what is it you're going to be trading? What is it you can trade? I mean, there's a lot of other things. The country is very creative. We're advanced in many other areas, but the reality at the end of the day, you have to have something on which to base your economy.
Brad Wall said it to me once, food, fuel, and fertilizer. He says, I've got everything the developing world wants. Well, you're going to take one of those out.
If you look at the growth in this industry, it's been a boon for the country, and it's paid for our social programs. It's paid for our health care. It's paying for our next generation, for education, etc. You begin to meddle with that or ignore it in pursuing something that isn't exactly well known in favor of what other countries don't seem to mind. I mean, years ago we talked about this whole thing about, let's make sure that we get to a level, get back to 1990. Remember the old Kyoto, and before that, the prior conventions. It was easy for other countries to shut off the unleaded fuel, shut down their coal plants, and go to natural gas from Russia. But we'd already done that. We've already made those kind of transitions. People are going to have to start to realize that there's a connection between their standard of living and the oil industry in Canada, because you can't do one without the other.
All right, Dan, thanks so much. We'll be back with Dan McFaig in a bit. Brian Lilley, Ezra Levant here at Rebel Media HQ. These are the election results show. We're going to start getting results from Quebec, Ontario, straight across the prairie shortly. Right now, though, John Robson and another look from the professor.
Wow. Can Justin Trudeau really do it? Are the Liberals back? Polls certainly suggest a very strong performance in this election, and that is already, in and of itself, an astonishing achievement. But can he go all the way? It's hard to remember already just what trouble the Liberals were in. I mean, they're the natural governing party. They won 19 out of 29 elections in the 20th century. They held power for 64 years. But in the last 4 elections, they have been in a world of hurt. They've been losing on average 34.5 seats per election. Election after election, a slide unparalleled in the party's history. They'd also been losing something like 5% of the popular vote share. They went from over 40% to under 20% in just 4 elections. They looked like a write-off. They hadn't won a majority in a federal election with an Anglophone leader since William Lyon Mackenzie King in 1945, and they hadn't won a majority of Quebec seats since Trudeau Sr. in 1980 because of a widespread feeling in that province that they'd been betrayed over the repatriation of the Constitution. And yet suddenly, here we are with them leading in the polls. Problem is, of course, a Canadian election is not a plebiscite. You don't win it by a poll. You don't win it by getting a majority of votes nationwide. You have to win riding by riding, and given the intensely regional nature of Canadian politics, you have to win province by province and region by region. So how does this math work for the Liberals? Let's suppose that they do quite well in Quebec. What do you want to give them there? 40 seats? Would you dare? Okay, Bloc may not be resurgent. NDP's bleeding support. I suppose it could happen. If they're strong in the Atlantic provinces, you can give them another 18 there and you're at 58. But to get a majority in the new parliament, you still need another 112 seats. And out west, they are certainly not going to have a strong showing there. They'll be lucky to get 20. So they still need to find 92 seats in, what's that place? Ontario. Now look, if anybody else calls it vote-rich Ontario or seat-rich Ontario, I'm going to scream, okay? We all know it's a big province. It's so big it's going to have 121 seats after the election. And yes, Ontario pretty much single-handedly elected Jean Chrétien. They gave him over 100 seats. But is Trudeau really going to win 90 seats in Ontario? And if he doesn't, where on earth do you find the other seats? Look, a strong rebound to official opposition would be a good thing, but it's not what the Liberals are thinking about now. The problem for them is, regionally, it's really hard to see how you get further. Of course, on the plus side, as long as they hold Stephen Harper below a majority, then they're going to create a coalition government propped up by the NDP. Now, that's going to create a lot of problems for them after the election. They're actually going to have to govern. And if you didn't think Justin Trudeau was ready to campaign, wait till you see him back in the house he grew up in. But the fact of the matter is, a majority is almost certainly out of reach, and even that minority is problematic once you start trying to add things up so the Tories don't get to 170. Yeah, people are tired of them. Yeah, they've been around for a long time, but still the regional math favors them.
Our live election coverage, which is sort of crazy because we just finished building this studio on Friday. This is our first time testing it out. Forgive us our little bumps in the road. We're ironing out the wrinkles. It's amazing because we started this whole website only 8 months ago. Speaking of starting amazing things, can I introduce to you my friend Theo Caldwell? Theo, great to see you.
Nice to see you.
We were at the Sun News Network on the very first day of that company, starting back in 2011. Thank you for being with us on our first day here in our studio.
No, it's my pleasure. It occurs to me that last federal election, we were all together, and we won that one, right? And there was, I made a lot of jokes. I started spewing nicknames left and right. It's nice to get the band back together, at least for one night, right? We'll see what happens.
Well, you keep busy. I mean, you do some stuff for us.
Yeah.
You're on AM 1010 Talk Radio here in Toronto.
Yeah.
What now? Listen, I lean conservative. So do you. Obviously, that's our brand here. The results aren't in, but we can see the trend. Would you say we're in for a Bob Rae-style decade of darkness?
Buddy, listen, I appreciate what you're trying to do.
Will you tell me?
One of the many things I've always admired about you is your sunny disposition in the face of adversity. And I heard you here tonight. I heard all you're saying. Oh, you know, I'm going to try to be positive, and you're asking, like, who are going to be the wise men in the Liberal Party? Let me explain something to you. It's over, man. Nice little country we used to have here. It's done. It's done. Let's assume present trends continue and Justin becomes, King Justin the First of his name. But let me tell you something. It's not just that Justin it seems to be, going to be Prime Minister, okay? And let me save you the suspense. He's going to be horrible. And what did you say before? Chrystia Freeland as Finance Minister? Good God, man, she wouldn't know the answer to a doorbell. But let's get past that for a second. It's not just that Justin's going to be Prime Minister, it seems, and what he might do. What did he say? Call the premiers together and talk about climate change. First thing. All right, by the way, how the premiers going to get to that meeting? Unicycle?
Right.
Carrier pigeon?
Yeah.
They're assuming they're going to take something that takes fossil fuels. But it's not just that Justin's going to be Prime Minister. It's that this country is so completely mentally checked out to elect this ridiculous ballerina to be in charge. The guy comes waddling along with nothing but his dad's surname, a smirk, and a dance belt. And we're putting him in charge of the country?
Well, okay. I got two questions for you. Number one is, does he really control all the levers? You've got 10 premiers, and not everything in life is decided by politics. Some things are decided by ordinary people. Does a disastrous Justin Trudeau, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, does a disastrous Justin Trudeau have the power to lights out for a whole country? Or has 10 years of Stephen Harper given us enough momentum that we can survive?
First, I think the devil would be very lucky to have you as advocate,
if
he could afford your hourly rate. That's A. Now, two, you're making kind of my point here, because this is what I'm saying. I'm saying culture is vastly more important than politics. You're right. It doesn't necessarily matter who's in this office or that office, who's prime minister or who's president. But the fact that the culture is so completely drifted away from anything that we used to know, that you can moor yourself to it, where people had any brains or judgment at all. The culture that would elect a Justin Trudeau or a Barack Obama, that's what worries me the most. One more thing, you said, can he really destroy the country? From a policy, economic perspective, absolutely yes. You know very well, Ezra. Let's say, God help us, saints preserve us, Justin gets a majority tonight. You know that a prime minister in Canada with a majority has got more power over this country than any democratically elected leader anywhere in the Western world. So yeah, he can screw us up economically, policy-wise. Energy, I heard you talking about energy and trade. He can wreck everything. That's true. He can do that. Forget about the premiers. It doesn't matter. But the fact that this country is so far drifted from what it used to be, that they would vote for a guy like this.
Well, you know, one of my favorite blogs is called smalldeadanimals.com.
Of course.
And Kate McMillan, she's got a phrase, she says, what we need is a famine. And she doesn't mean it seriously. What she means is, things are so good for us, we're so comfortable and wealthy that we can gamble on foolish things like electing Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister. And I'm wondering if the fact that Stephen Harper kept us out of the Great Recession, we were the last ones in, we were the first ones out, it was the shallowest recession. We don't even know how lucky we've been for 10 years. Right. The dogs that didn't bark, constitutional crises, there hasn't been one. There's no fight with Quebec. All these things that we lacked, that phrase, maybe we need a famine, makes me think, well, maybe, you know, Canada needs, and I hate to say this, a dose of left-wing Dalton McGuintyism, Justin Trudeauism, good and hard, to shake people out and say deficits don't balance themselves, and we don't have, you know, all these things we have are not the default state.
I mean, the problem with that is you can have a Dalton McGuinty, a disaster like a Dalton McGuinty, and what happens? Ontario sends the Liberals back with a majority. And frankly, when you say that a guy like Justin Trudeau unfavorably compares with Barack Obama, I heard you earlier in the thing, I think you're giving Barack Obama too much credit. I think it's a continent-wide, Western nation-wide situation whereby nobody understands the gravitas you need to have, the varied skill set you need to have.
It's a celebrity culture.
It is absolutely a celebrity culture.
I think people were voting for a boyfriend. I think people thought he actually rolled out an ad, Trudeau did, about his hair in the last few days. And today he's doing sort of cheerleader-style sort of poses. I think people are voting for an American Idol champ, not a prime minister.
Yeah, and
Vladimir Putin, we've got to take a break in a minute. Yeah. What do you think the heavy guys in the world, the Chinese premier, the Russian president, Iran's ayatollahs, what do you think they're thinking?
Well, let's choose our words carefully, because I think we both are aware that Vladimir Putin and the president of China are watching this.
I know, so you're speaking directly to them.
So let me just say this to you, Vladimir Putin. Don't judge us all by the prime minister we're about to elect. But listen, can you imagine Justin Trudeau in a room with Vladimir Putin? It's going to make Vienna 1961 look like a roaring success, which of course it was for Khrushchev. No, we're done. This is what I say. Not only are we done because he's going to be disastrous on the foreign policy and domestic fronts, we're done because the country has so lost a sense of itself, it would vote for this ridiculous mooncalf instead of a guy who's been competent and, as you put it very well, a victim of his own success in the person of Stephen Harper, a guy, by the way, I don't defend, but he was absolutely the best available in this election.
Theo, great to see you again. Thanks for your passion and your humor and your irreverent style. You're a rebel in your own way. Folks, we got to take a break, but take a look at these words and we'll see you in a minute.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to TheRebel.media/TheMegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Welcome back to the Rebel live election night coverage in our new studio, and thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for helping us build this studio. Could be some hiccups along the way. This is the chance you take when you launch on election night with a new studio, new setup. Hamish Marshall with me again, Ezra Levant, of course. I think you might have heard of that guy. But Hamish, you and I were just talking as Ezra was in here having a chat about the results coming in from Ontario or Quebec through to Alberta. You said the Conservatives seem to be holding well in rural Alberta. That's good news.
Yeah, rural Alberta is holding strong for the Conservatives. There's one riding where there's only one poll in, but they're still leading by over 500 votes.
Okay. I was looking at my home riding areas in the south end of Ottawa. No poll results that I saw yet.
Brian, I understand we're having some technical problems with your mic, so I'm going to jump in while we fix it out. Folks, I appreciate your patience. Welcome to live TV on the first day we start the studio. Brian, check your mic, but Hamish, I want to jump in. You're talking about my home turf. Now, I understand that there were some ridings, even in the heart of Calgary itself, that were vulnerable. I went to school with a fellow named Kent Hare at law school, bright young guy, in a wheelchair, but a tiger, a real fighter for the Liberal Party. Does he have a chance in poking through?
Absolutely. He's running in Calgary Centre. It was a seat the Liberals almost won in a by-election a few years ago, and he's got a very strong chance of poking through. As you say, he was an MLA, represented part of that riding. But what we're seeing is we haven't seen any results in Calgary yet, so it's hard to say what the trends are there. But we are getting results in Quebec and Ontario, which are showing the Liberals on the move as well.
Okay, well, let's talk about Quebec, because I understand that the breaking point was the NACAB issue. I think that's conventional wisdom. Has that redounded to the success of the Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois?
Well, it looks like the Conservatives might be, it looks like they're ahead in a seat called Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, which is a seat they never held. It used to be held by an independent guy called André Arthur. But it looks like the Liberals actually are making, right now, very early returns, are doing well in rural Quebec.
That's a surprise. I mean, we know...
They're going back, it looks, to St. Maurice, which was Jean Chrétien's old riding. They haven't really been off the island of Montreal in a long time.
That's true, but they're also doing well in Matane and the Gaspésie in the eastern part of the province, and they're even leading in a place called Joliette, which everybody used to think was sort of deep sovereignist territory. So they could be doing very well in Quebec.
Megantic leaning Conservative right now. This is home of the big explosion. I thought that maybe have damaged them, but that's not a riding they previously held.
No, that was held by the former minister Christian Paradis, who isn't running again. So they've got a new candidate running. There was a lot of concern that perhaps the Conservatives would lose Megantic TheRebel because Christian Paradis, the former Quebec political minister, wasn't running again. But it looks like early returns, the Conservatives are still very much in the hunt there.
Okay, I mistakenly had that as a pickup.
It's Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. They're looking at a pickup there. It was held by the NDP. If they're winning Portneuf, that bodes well for some other seats in Quebec City, places like Louis Saint-Laurent, Charlesbourg, Saint-Charles. Those sort of seats could very much go Conservative.
Hamish, are there any results from Toronto itself?
There's a few from the GTA so far, looking strongly Liberal, places in Mississauga, but they're still very, very, very early. These are areas that the Liberals would have won polls even in the last election, so it's just too soon to tell. But there are some polls. The Liberals are leading in some rural Ontario seats.
Bay of Quinte includes the wine region in Prince Edward County, but that was currently held by the Conservatives.
Yep.
Because it was basically Kingston, and then you went to downtown Toronto before you saw another Liberal.
Right. And now there could be a few more splotches of red along that coast of Lake Ontario.
All right.
Well, I want to ask you a question because you're a pollster. Did the pollsters get it wrong, or did the trend just accelerate over the weekend and literally today on election day?
Well, that's what it's looking like, is that the trend continued. But it's still very early, so it's hard to see what exactly the final numbers are in terms of popular vote. So
let's not get ahead of ourselves yet.
Oh, well, I'm just, you know what, I'm embracing my sorrow. I'm embracing my despair now. I'm reducing expectations, so if even one Conservative flag is still flying in Calgary, I'll call that a big win, Brian. Listen, I gotta say, that it is healthy in a democracy to rotate the parties, and although I am sad for the Conservative loss, and I think that Justin Trudeau will be a disaster, it is a healthy thing. Alberta had Conservatives for 44 years in a row. They weren't very conservative at the end of it, and they were more corrupt than anything. So there is something systemically good about a change, and I'm trying my best to find a silver lining tonight. Listen, you guys are great. Here's a quick prepared package for you about our next subject. Come right back.
The NDP took a very strong principled stand against C-51.
Now, Mr. Harper, we all know, on C-51, wants us to be afraid that there's a terrorist hiding behind any leaf and rock around us, and we all need to be afraid, and that's why he's there to protect us.
This government is fully committed to protecting both our freedoms and our security, both of which are under attack from the group ISIS. A re-elected Conservative government will designate travel to places that are ground zero for terrorist activity a criminal offense.
All countries, including Canada, should be fighting to stop radicalization here at home. And that's something that Mr. Harper has simply failed to do.
Canada has, by far, the largest per capita refugee resettlement program in the world. We are going to make sure that we are selecting the most vulnerable bona fide refugees, well, obviously with a focus on the religious and ethnic minorities that are the most vulnerable. We are talking about a terrorist war zone a lot of people are coming from. We will make sure that we are also protecting Canadians from the security risks.
Mr. Harper is looking to profit from any sorts of politics of division or fear that he possibly can.
And if indeed there are cases of oppression, let's not go after the oppressed person, let's go after the oppressor. And it's not by depriving a woman in that circumstance of her citizenship and of her rights.
There are times in our open, tolerant, pluralistic society that as part of our interactions with each other, we reveal our identity through revealing our face. And when you join the Canadian family in a public citizenship ceremony, it is essential that that is a time where you reveal yourselves to Canadians, and that is something widely supported by Canadians.
Are appalled by the fact that the government would go to such lengths right now to prevent a single woman from voting on October 19th. That is completely irresponsible. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. You devalue the citizenship of every Canadian in this place and in this country when you break down and make it conditional for anyone. We have the rule of law in this country, and you can't take away citizenship just like when someone dies.
You seriously say, Mr. Trudeau, we never be able to revoke citizenship from somebody? Because we revoked the citizenship already of war criminals, and why would we not revoke the citizenship
Welcome
of
back to
people
TheRebel.media, our election night live coverage. I'm having a blast. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous because it's the first time we've tried this studio, and it's the first time we've had this many thousands of people watching. Thank you for being here. Dan, thanks for being here as a Liberal. Brian, we're going to talk now about the issue that is very important to me that I felt that the Conservatives did not emphasize in the end, and that is national security. Dan, I want to ask you this. This is a sign of hope for me. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals supported Bill C-51, the anti-terrorism legislation that gave CSIS agents the power, with some oversight, to, let's say, stop someone from buying a plane ticket to go to Iraq and Syria, to seize a passport from someone who was going to join the Islamic State. Trudeau voted for that, and it caused great consternation amongst progressives and the left. And I notice even here in Toronto, a lot of NDPers added on the top of their signs, repeal C-51. Obviously, that has not hurt Justin Trudeau. That gives me hope that he will maybe find some policy flexibility to come back to the center. What do you think about that?
I think the decision he made was in fact the right one. I would have supported him had he made that decision, had I been in the caucus at that time. I think it is a glimpse of what is likely to come. It's not pragmatic, it's not compromittical, it's an understanding that there are some bad people out there who can do bad things. What I think we've also lost, though, is our detachment with 2001 rather, 9/11. The further we go from that, the less people tend to think of that as an important issue. There are other issues that tend to be more prevalent, and I certainly think you saw that in this past election.
And I think perhaps the success of our security agencies and police in stopping plots, be it the Toronto 18, the Via Rail plot, that would have brought us back to 9/11 with a train going down over the Niagara Gorge or bombs going off in downtown Toronto.
And working with a lot of mosques and others to prevent it from happening.
Yes.
Identifying these folks before they get into trouble.
Why did you say mosque there? We keep hearing that
you
should just
Robert
say
Heft.
all houses of worship.
No. Robert Heft is a good friend of mine. I've worked with him many years. He has been on the forefront of this. He has no difficulty saying when he's working in that kind of environment, he has been very, very emphatic about it, and he's been very successful.
I think
a good example of one.
Brian's making a
I
joke.
know you're poking me.
That was one of the complaints from both Trudeau and Mulcair was, why, to Stephen Harper, why do you talk about mosques instead of houses of worship? And, well, because the Quakers aren't trying to do a lot of, terror plots. You have to deal with what the issue is. And you remember back in the 80s and 90s, there were arrests of Irishmen trying to buy rocket-propelled grenades and rocket launchers.
Aiding the cause, doing a good thing either side, and doing some devious and really nasty things.
And they were arrested, and there was not consternation about it.
Well, and the means to finance these things, etc. Look, I worked in consular affairs under the Martin government. I have a pretty good idea of who was the good guys, who were the bad guys, and the ones we had to be careful of. In any circumstance, you will always find people who will do some awful things. It just so happens to be that a lot of them are certainly motivated by one particular group, and I don't single them out. I'm simply saying for the reality of what we're dealing with, Canada has been part of the mission in Afghanistan. Naturally, we have those who believe that that was the wrong decision. In my view, of course, it was the right decision, and for that reason, there is always those in certain areas that will be convinced, they will be cajoled, they will be brainwashed into doing some awful things. And that's where we need effective legislation, but we also need proper enforcement. And the police have to have the tools to do their job. At the same time, we have a Charter of Rights. And there is no law in this country that can be drafted. Justin Trudeau's father made sure that would happen after the War and Measures Act of October 16, 1970, that there would be a balance. And I think in this case, I believe Parliament has struck the right balance. I think Trudeau did the right thing.
Let me throw another hopeful note at you. And I remember when Barack Obama, many of whose senior staff came up to advise on the Trudeau campaign, Barack Obama swore on a stack of Bibles again and again that the very first act he would do when elected president would be to shut down Guantanamo Bay. He must have made that in 100 stump speeches. And you recall in 2008, there was a great fatigue with the war on terror, tired of George Bush. Well, here we are, it's almost 2016 already, and Guantanamo Bay is still operating. Now it's less full. So that is a candidate, Obama, versus President Obama with the weight of the world on his shoulders and the protection of his own people. I'm hoping that when Justin Trudeau gets his first serious CSIS briefing, our CMP briefing.
And hopefully he doesn't take him on an iPad.
Yeah, what do you think, Dan? Do you think that he's going to pull back from some of his thoughts?
I think there's going to be a lot of contradictions, but he's going to be able to say, I did not have the advantage of knowledge. I mean, you can't fault someone for not knowing something, but to make a statement under the certainty in which you make those statements, you have to be able to have 20/20 foresight, and I don't think in this circumstance, he will probably come out with a lot more gray hairs I did when you realize that the world is not exactly a perfect place. You talk of Guantanamo Bay and the work that I did with Canadians who were detained there, and just getting information accurately was always a challenge.
As far as issues around some of the headlines we saw over the last while, refugees, that was billed as both a foreign policy issue, but also a national security issue. And yet when you raise the issue of, is it a good idea to bring over unvetted, mass numbers of people from Syria, where we don't have a good guy. At least in Iraq, we can point to who the good guys are and the bad guys are. There's no good guys in the Syrian civil war. We were told, no, don't use security as an excuse not to do anything. Is there a real security issue with Syria? Because if it's not addressed and we bring over 25,000 people by the end of the year, I am worried.
Well, the Syrian officials will tell you there is. I met with Minister Fumala years ago when I was dealing with the Abdul al-Malki case and met with these individuals and said, look, we know that there are problems here, and there are some people who will do great things, others that you should be very cautious of. I think we have to, in advance, begin the work, the preparation of trying to, where we can, sift out the good from the bad and ensure that those who truly need and are deserving are expedited. But you cannot do that without recognizing certain realities. There are people who will be in there who are not true refugees. I mean, I would wish that a year ago, when I spoke to several candidates and individuals who were involved with the crisis, when ISIS was surrounding that mountain, and a lot of people were being slaughtered, happened to be Christians, being completely wiped off the map, that we had acted then. Instead, we got very little interest from any party or any leader. Suddenly, we have a very tragic situation, occurs in the middle of an election. A child is washed up on the shore, had died, is drowning, trying to, with his father, escape to a better place. Suddenly it's an issue. It should not have waited that long, and I think it would have been incumbent on the opposition as much as the government to have acted last October, a year ago, when the crisis began.
Here's the thing. The vast majority of people who immigrate to Canada are not scrutinized like a job interview. In fact, it's just a paper application. Yep. And the idea of screening 25,000 refugees in a foreign language, when many of them come from poor, or they're not a document-heavy culture in rural Syria. It's not like you do a Google search, and, oh, look at this guy's Facebook page.
Yes,
so
right.
even finding out who they are, the language barrier, and there are people there who are the lambs, but there are also wolves who wouldn't mind moving to wealthy Canada. The Islamic State has positively said that they will sneak into the West through these folks. This is one of those issues where I'm hoping that Justin Trudeau has a Barack Obama Guantanamo Bay moment and says, okay, whoa, I said I'd take 25,000 by Christmas. Talking to CSIS, we can't do that safely. Let's just slow it on down and do some other things.
Well, he may also say, I'm working with international fora. I'm working with the United Nations. I'm working with security agencies around the world.
Blame it on Obama, who's going slow.
Well, I mean, you could do that, but I think the fact is we need to make sure that we bring them in, but we bring them in at a pace that also prevents any type of unwanted or unintended consequences.
Let's follow up on that. There was a kerfuffle when there was a suggestion that certain groups would be favored over others. You mentioned the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. You mentioned the Christian. I mean, when the Islamic State took over Mosul, they destroyed 1,000 years of Christianity. They either murdered, raped, converted, or drove out.
Yep.
And to me, there's a political correctness to say, no, we'll take...
But this happened not just with the political parties in this election.
No, it happened a year ago. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
The department has stepped in to try and stop the current Harper government from favoring the very religious minorities, some of which are Muslim minorities, who are being slaughtered. Because the government has said, we want to bring in those people. So it's not just the political correctness of the parties, but the department as well. And you'll know this, Dan. Sometimes you have to fight your own department to do what's right.
In this case, when the outcome is very different. Yes, I did in consular affairs, where they said, you're going to bring some terrible people back. I said, look, if they're bad people, you arrest them when they get off here. The guys with the yellow stripes on their pants can do a damn good job. If they're Canadian citizens, arrest them as they come off the plane. In this circumstance, this has been going on for a very long time. The discourse in Canada, let alone the understanding, the passion that Canadians have had, whether it's expressed tonight in the election or not, only began very recently. In fact, this has been a much longer problem. And of course, who are the friends? Who are the odds? Who presents a security risk? Who doesn't? Someone who might have been with us 2 years ago is now completely juxtaposed on the other side of the equation.
But 20,000 people from Iraq, from the Iraq side of this equation, and I don't see them as two different, completely different elements. The only thing is that in Iraq, we do have a better ability to know who the good guys are.
We've been there for a while.
Yeah, we've been there for a while, and the fact is there are regions that are controlled by the actual Iraqi government.
Let me give you an example of one of the areas. It's a very small area, but if I'm looking at, say, folks that are in the north end, in this case, those on the Turkish border, those who have worked for some time, have fought ISIS, they may not very well be the people that would be allowed into Canada, would be inadmissible by virtue of the being part of an organization which was at some point in the past seen as opposed to
You're talking
our
about
values.
The PKK.
Kurdish,
Kurdish.
I mean, so we look at them and say, well, they're on our side. They're fighting ISIS. Well, if you look at it, and I had this problem often when we're dealing with trying to get Canadians or individuals out of Iraq during the uprising that we saw, and of course the period of time 2003 to 2007 when you had the massive executions, murders, and the response by officials in that country, which was a very dangerous situation for Canadians. We tried to bring them in, and they said, well, hang on a second. These are individuals who left Iran, to fight the Iranians, but they are deemed as people who are deserving of protection, but not allowed to come to the country. Can't think of the name of the group or organization. But going through these briefings, you suddenly realize that what you thought was, in fact, a very clear picture becomes quite murky. And it's that kind of opaqueness that requires greater vigilance on the security side.
Oh, boy. You know, the complexity, the grown-up the consequences of getting this wrong are so heavy. And I look around and I hope there's some heavyweights waiting in the wings to come in and help be Justin Trudeau's Sherpa on this. And I hope those people present. I hope it's not his team of teeny boppers who've been running the campaign.
They've done it before, so I think there's still a few that were left over. I'm confident that they will do that, but again, it really requires absolute scrutiny, and you can't do it in 30 seconds. And it cannot be done to satisfy a particular constituency that says, oh no, we have to do this, accept them all, as we did with the boat people in 1979. It's a very different circumstance. And of course, with social media, with what has occurred in many parts of the Middle East, you're not exactly sure what you're going to get if you don't take the time to figure these people out. You're quite right on being able to scrutinize. We don't have the ability to look on Facebook and say, hey, we know his character, we know her character, she's in, he's out, or vice versa.
The issue of national security as a whole, are there any red flags that you see for a Liberal government coming in? I'm going to sound like Ezra a bit. I'm not ready to throw in the towel yet. We'll be back with more numbers for you in a few minutes.
Early days.
Let's say, what are national security things that they might have to bend on when they look at reality?
I would have to believe that because of the way in which the outcome of the revolution, of the war, of the response in that region, whether it's Iraq or in Syria, if you're looking very clearly at where an individual stood 5 years ago versus where they might stand today as a refugee, through circumstances in which we've seen people move in very different directions. There are allies for the period of several weeks. Next several weeks, there are enemies.
They might be getting trained by the Obama administration, and they're fighting them.
I would say that what you have is a very complex arrangement of individuals who are desperate to get to Canada, but for which we must make sure that they are actually, that they meet the test and that they are not going to present a danger to other Canadians. They want to be here to live peaceful lives. Great, we're all for that, but you have to take your time on this because it is not. I'm sure there's a ready list of people who could be admitted tomorrow, but there's also a very large group of people you could admit who will not, in fact, be very helpful to the country. And a government that does that won't be accused of dragging its feet. It'll be accused of letting in the wrong people.
Yeah. I tell you, it's momentous. I feel like a dam is about to burst, Dan. For 10 years, people and ideas have been kept at bay by Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, and that there will be an enormous number of people who said, I've been waiting 10 years to get this, or to get this, or to make this change. And it'll be interesting to see how fast and how radical Trudeau moves if he does a Rachel Notley and says yes to everything, or if he says, okay, whoa, we're going to value continuity, and we're going to be moderate, and we're going to be, it'll be interesting to see.
Well, it depends what he sees. When you guys report what's going to happen tonight, because I haven't seen the results, it looks good in the Atlantic, but if it becomes a sweep, he will have virtually a blank check to do as he wishes. Yeah. One would hope that he is cautioned by facts and circumstances, and that he proceeds with that mandate in a way that I think brings Canadians together with the belief the government's doing all the best that it can under the circumstances, which there is so much conflict.
I'm going to check those numbers again, see how it's going. I don't have access to them right here in the live studio. We're going to check in with the Hillbilly Professor, John Robson, for his look at the Conservatives, and back with more numbers, more thoughts on what's going on in a moment.
Can Stephen Harper really pull it off? Can he win a fourth election? Can he get a second majority? Well, he's got two important allies in his effort to do so, but he's also got two important adversaries. His allies are Justin Trudeau and Thomas Mulcair. The best argument for voting for Stephen Harper is that you cannot possibly conceive of letting either of those two, or those two together, govern the country. But Harper's biggest enemies here are Stephen Harper and Sir John A. Macdonald. The problem with Stephen Harper is that voters don't like him. In fact, it's so bad that the Tory talking points now routinely include, "This is not a popularity contest." Asterisk, footnote, because if it was, we'd get clobbered. Nobody likes our guy. Harper has alienated true conservatives in this country. I know, I'm one of them. He has not engaged moderates. And in some sense, his pitch really is, vote for me because the other guys are just so awful that you got to hold your nose and do it. His other enemy, though, is Sir John A. Macdonald. And the reason I say that is that Harper's trying to do something no Tory has done since Macdonald. In fact, no Tory has won back-to-back majorities since Brian Mulroney, and he only won 2 elections. No Tory has won 3 elections since Diefenbaker, and 2 of his were minorities. Not since Sir John A.'s glory days did a Tory leader win 4 elections, including 2 majorities. In fact, in Macdonald's case, it was 4. And even he was out of power for a gap in between. So Harper is really trying to make history in a country that hasn't, on the whole, been friendly to conservatives, especially not since the end of the 19th century when Sir Wilfrid Laurier made the Liberals the natural governing party. Still, there are reasons for thinking that Stephen Harper is in pretty good shape. And they are, again, the fact that in order to understand Canadian elections and predict outcomes, it's not enough to look at the popular vote. It's not enough to look riding by riding or look at those key riding matchups people love to do. You've got to look at the regions. Now, there are 107 seats in the west and the north. That's up from 95 last time. And the Tories won over 70 last time. They're probably going to do almost as well as a proportion this time, so you can figure they're going to get 75 seats there. That means they've only got to find 95 in the rest of the country to get a majority. And they do need a majority because they're not going to have a minority government. If nobody wins, it's going to be Liberals with NDP support. Now, they're not going to get a lot of seats in Atlantic Canada. They'd be lucky to get 10. So they're still looking for almost 90 seats elsewhere in the country. In Quebec, nah. You want to give them 30 seats there? Don't. They won 10 seats in 2006, they won 10 seats 2008, they won 5 seats 2011. Even if the NDP vote collapses, the Tories are not going to pick up a lot of seats. They have to score big in Ontario, and they're meant to be in trouble there, and they're certainly under pressure there. But here's a consoling thought for Stephen Harper and his team. When you realize it does come down to Ontario, and the rest of the country gags, but it's a fact, it is going to come down to Ontario. Ontarians are resolute vote splitters. They're even more determined to elect one party provincially and another one federally than people in Quebec or New Brunswick, who are also very keen. I mean, you look at the pattern. When Ontarians were voting enthusiastically for Trudeau Sr., they were also sending Bill Davis to Queen's Park. Then, when they switched to Brian Mulroney, what did they do? They elected David Peterson's Liberals and then Bob Rae's NDP. Then, when they swung back to Jean Chrétien, they elected Mike Harris. And then when they voted for Stephen Harper, they elected Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, including, and this is critical, in the last Ontario election, Wynne won again. So that means it's going to be very hard for the Liberals to do well in Ontario. I might add the Liberals also control New Brunswick and Quebec, both factors that are discouraging for Liberal prospects there. So yes, people are rather tired of Stephen Harper. He is never going to win a popularity contest. There are good reasons for voting against him. The left is almost hysterically opposed to him. A lot of us conservatives don't like him either. But you start looking at that regional math, how strong the Tories are in the West, and then how well they're likely to do in Ontario given historical patterns, and you realize, yeah, you know what? It's an uphill climb, but Harper looks like he might very well make it.
And welcome back to the Rebel.media's election night coverage. I promise you more numbers, and they're not going to make you happy. Drum roll, please. Hamish Marshall, what are you declaring?
We're going to have a Liberal majority tonight. It's not going to be a big majority, but they're at somewhere in the 160 seat range right now, and BC's only beginning to report. They'll get over that magic 170 number. Conservatives are going to end up with somewhere around 110 seats.
I miss the days when BC would only grant the Liberals 1 or 2 seats.
Yeah, well, last time they only won 2, but I think this time if the trends continue like what we've seen in Ontario, and suburban British Columbia is becoming acting more and more like suburban Ontario, we're going to see the Liberals winning, at least a dozen seats in British Columbia.
Okay, so let me put this out there. Obviously, the Conservatives lost some of the vote that they had last time, 20 to 25% of the vote. We'll see what the numbers are like at the end of the night, but to me it's looking like 20 to 20% of what they had last time decided for whatever reason they wouldn't come out or they wouldn't vote for them. But their vote didn't collapse. It didn't run away. And it stayed pretty steady throughout this campaign. The story of this campaign, to me, is the collapse of the NDP.
Absolutely.
The utter collapse of the NDP.
And it's not just a collapse in Ontario where we've seen their numbers been going down and the Liberals profiting from that in the last few weeks. it was in Quebec as well. The Liberals are winning seats in rural Quebec, seats they haven't won since 1980 in rural Quebec because of the NDP
So not
collapse.
even Chrétien's good year in 2000.
Right.
Going to 1980.
Yeah, they've completely swept the eastern townships, large chunks of the Montérégie, south of Montreal, other parts of rural northern and central Quebec as well. The Liberals are gaining a lot. Now the Conservatives have also gained in Quebec.
Okay.
So we see the Conservatives have gone from having 5 seats, mostly clustered around the area south of Quebec City, to winning a bunch in Quebec City, as well as some around. A seat like Richmond-Arthabaska, it looks like they're going to pick up. They're running the popular mayor there, Alan Ray.
So mid-September, I was out in Calgary for the Globe debate, talking to people around Mulcair and his camp. They were feeling really good a month ago what the prospects were, but they said, we're worried a bit about Ontario. They said BC's doing really well, Quebec is okay. This is just before the NACAB issue really, breaks up in that province. They said Ontario's the tough nut for us to crack because of Bob Rae.
Right.
Bob Rae's not the problem here for you.
No, they completely, this election became for huge chunks of voters in Ontario and also in Quebec in the last few weeks. It clearly evolved into who's best to defeat Stephen Harper, and Mulcair managed to persuade very few people that he was that choice, despite leading early in the polls. And Trudeau managed to connect, and as I said, he's winning in seats that the Liberals haven't had a hope in
Since his dad ran.
Yeah, exactly, since his dad ran.
Okay, so is this brilliant strategy on the part of the Liberals, problems with the NDP, or voters making up their own mind? What would you put it at? I'm putting it at voters myself.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the Liberal strategy ever called for large gains in rural Quebec. We didn't see Trudeau campaigning there in any organized sense. Everybody who
the number that the Liberals were giving to me about a month ago was, you know what, 20 would be really good for us in Quebec.
So in Quebec, there's actually only 18 seats that are less than 2/3 Francophone, and traditional Liberals do well in Anglophone Quebec. So people are saying maybe 20, 22, 23 is the most the Liberals can hope to win. I think the Liberals are going to come out of this with perhaps maybe as many as 40 seats in Quebec. And those extra seats is what's putting them over to a majority.
Okay. And then in Ontario, obviously different issues at play for the NDP collapse.
Well, it's interesting. Toronto itself, Ezra asked about Toronto. Right now, there's only one Democrat leading in the whole city of Toronto, in Jack Layton's old seat in Toronto, Danforth. The Liberals look like they're sweeping the rest of the city, although there's a couple of Conservatives holding on, but it's still early days. So what's fascinating is that the Liberals made a very concerted approach to say we're the party for Toronto. The NDP actually aren't a good fit for Toronto. They bought out the cover of the Metro magazine, Metro newspaper, basically saying the NDP we're more left-wing than the NDP and we're a better fit from Toronto, and it seems to have worked.
Is this a good night for pollsters if the numbers come in close?
Well,
I'd like, but I say that knowing that there were several polls that had different results than what we might be seeing.
Yes, well, a lot of pollsters were sort of hedging their bets. They were sort of putting out different scenarios, saying, well, this could happen, but also this could happen. From what I've seen thus far, I don't think anyone has captured the scale of this Liberal win. We'll have to see what the exact number is, but it looks to me, based on early returns, the Liberals are probably going to be north of 40% in terms of popular vote, which nobody was predicting.
All right, well, shocking night. Hamish Marshall, thanks so much. We're not done with you yet, though. And we're not done with you. Stick around. This is going to become the house of the unofficial opposition with this Liberal majority. I'm Brian Lilley. This is the Rebel.media election night coverage. Back after this.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to therebel.media/themegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
so open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to TheRebel.media/TheMegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Rebel.media, our inaugural night for our studio and an auspicious night for Justin Trudeau. It is clear to me that he will be the Prime Minister with a majority, a shocking development that I don't think anyone, including most Liberals, would have imagined just a few weeks ago. Let's stop for a moment and look at the foreign policy issues of this campaign. Then we'll come right back and talk about what we can expect under Prime Minister Trudeau.
This election is about change, and there's no area where Canadians want change more than in that of our foreign affairs.
Canada would put an end to our participation in the combat mission in Iraq and in Syria immediately.
This Conservative government will make sure we stay in the international coalition fighting ISIS.
We are going to end the bombing mission if we form government and shift into a training and support mission.
We're also involved, in fact, in training troops.
The NDP doesn't think that more bombing and more war is the solution.
There is not a peacekeeping mission to be had right now in Iraq and Syria.
We need to ensure that we're equipping local people to be able to bring that fight to ISIS. Anytime a Canadian government chooses to send our troops into harm's way, it has a duty to be open, transparent, and clear about what the mission is.
Imagine, first day of office, that we would have a Prime Minister who would say to the United States, we are pulling out of the joint military mission against the Islamic State. If you really want to poison the relationship, that would be the way to do it.
We have to do humanitarian aid on the ground, and we have to provide military support so that these millions of people cannot continue to be attacked and killed and displaced.
We could use military assets to start moving refugees out of the area more rapidly.
That Canada over the past years has failed to be the country that we like to imagine it to be.
The NDP stands foursquare with the people of Ukraine against this Russian invasion.
They accuse this government of being alarmist, as we pointed out to the world, the deterioration of democracy and human rights in Russia under his rule, and his increasingly aggressive and destabilizing behavior internationally.
Mr. Harper has made a big deal out of talking loudly and strongly at Mr. Putin. But the reality is, Canada has such diminished voice on the world stage that Mr. Harper hasn't noticed that Vladimir Putin didn't listen to him when he told him to get out of Ukraine.
Mr. Trudeau, you can't even stand up to Stephen Harper on C-51. How are you going to stand up to Putin?
Welcome back to TheRebel.media, our election night coverage. Good friend Dan McTague here. I'm Brian Lilley, Ezra Levant, of course, and you just heard from the leaders about foreign policy during this campaign. Dan, you know, a couple of years ago, liberals started saying to me, and it was liberals first, not conservatives, not you Democrats, liberals started saying to me, this guy Trudeau, I don't know, can you imagine him sitting down with Vladimir Putin? And this is before Putin got really nasty.
I think he's a nice guy.
Obviously, not an issue in this election, at least not in the minds of voters.
I don't think policy in that context really, I didn't hear a lot of people talking about leadership engaging with other high-level officials around the world. I think Canadians take it as a given. And the same things may have been said of Harper, of Chrétien.
Well, you remember the knock at Harper was that he hadn't traveled much. He'd only
hadn't gone out of the country. Exactly. The point is that you can be very selective about who you want to say can engage and not. The prime ministers will receive briefing. They will have a better understanding of what they have to talk about. The meetings themselves really are the pinnacle of what happens, the hard work behind them. So if there's any kind of engagement with world leaders, you know full well it's the bureaucrats, it's the policy divisions, it's the PMO, PCO working together saying, this is what we're going to accomplish. You guys sit down, share a bit of canapes and swill back a bit of Perrier and shake hands and move on.
Ezra mentioned the word Sherpas earlier. When you're doing foreign affairs, this is an actual term in diplomacy. For every big multilateral event that goes on, there are Sherpas. That's their official name, and they're the guys that go in and guide your country's policy at the round tables before the leaders get there.
Look, I did foreign affairs for a couple of years. I sat there, I had the refoulement, denouement, I had the on the margins, all these wonderful technical things. But yes, well before you sit down to those high-level meetings for the cameras and others, you are in fact engaging with the other nation. And that can be for bilateral issues on the economy, it could be matters of immigration issues, it could be MLATs, mutual legal assistance treaties, a whole host of reasons. There are some obviously where you'd be advised not to sit down with those kind of leaders, in which case the work is done behind the scenes in a very less than transparent way.
Well, Trudeau said he'd tell Putin off to his face, so I want the cameras rolling for that.
Oh, he probably will. I mean, and what will that do? I mean, the fact is, I think behind that is going to have to be a lot more work diplomacy, and that's ongoing. Good luck with that.
You know, it's easy to talk about foreign affairs when you're the third-party leader. Most of your mind, I would imagine, is on domestic ramifications. So if you're courting expat communities here, like the diaspora, but it's all of a sudden different when you're sitting at the table with the big boys. And let me ask you, for example, Jean Chrétien said no to Iraq, but it's almost like he had to pay a price for that by sending our troops into Afghanistan.
Into Kandahar.
Yeah, in green camouflage.
Oh, sorry, no, he didn't send them into Kandahar. That was Palmer.
But it was.
Yes, we sent.
I mean, if we want to be in the front ranks of NATO and keep our great relationship with America, we have to shoulder the burden. So Trudeau has repeatedly and forcefully said he will withdraw our CF-18s. He's even mocked them. Withdraw the CF-18s from the Islamic State battle. Maybe that's going to be another Obama Guantanamo Bay promise that gets put aside, but he was pretty adamant about it. I wonder, I mean, Obama has been cheering for Trudeau, but that's going to change now when he's counting on Trudeau for things, don't you think?
Well, I think there's no doubt that what happens in the United States, what happens with respect to our NATO partners, is going to be very important in terms of determining what we are actually going to do. And you're quite right, the context in which Trudeau may have said this is, a third party, got nothing to lose, got nothing to risk. Canadians see a lot of themselves in foreign policy. We're all sons, daughters, granddaughters, except for the native, the Takdun of this country, the First Nations. We are all descendants of immigration, so we do have an attachment. We were joking a little earlier about being Irish, but many of us believe that there is something valuable in Canada in its ability to speak to the rest of the world, whether it is historical, whether it is by virtue of where we come from, dual citizenship, consular affairs. These things have now taken prominence, and I think that's why you're going to see a bit of a different approach from Trudeau. I think he'll be starting to emphasize world development. In fairness, Harper did a lot of work in that area, a significant amount of work. Maternal health, exactly, got me in a lot of trouble. We'll talk about that a little later on. We see that there is more engagement with nations that traditionally have not been those you speak to. But again, these things get lost. Once you normalize a relationship with a country that you couldn't speak to before, suddenly it's not vogue, it's not important. Foreign affairs had lost a lot of its mojo, its preeminence over the years, only because there was a belief that it was either the war on terrorism or was always morphed into something about, liking this guy, not liking that guy, going from G8 to G7, emphasizing G20. I think what you're going to see now is more of a return to what it was like back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not out of nostalgia, but perhaps engagement based on diaspora.
Let me ask you a question, because you mentioned maternal health and said got you in trouble.
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean, but I think I might. That's one that got Harper in trouble when he announced it, because he said, he had this plan through the UN Millennium Development Goals when he was chair of the G8 and G20. He said, let's make this a goal. Have mothers survive childbirth and have kids live to age 6.
Yep.
And I don't think there was any pro-abortion or anti-abortion sentiment in it. But immediately, and I broke the story on News Talk 1010, immediately these groups came forward and said, we know how to do that, let's fund more abortions and then more kids will live to 6. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, if we have abortions, then more kids live to 6. And it's a weird thing, and Harper said, no, that's not the point. I want to fund for kids to live to age 6. Well, Trudeau's going to turn around and start funding abortions in third world countries that don't want them.
I became a Privy Councillor, and my responsibility was in foreign affairs and Canadians abroad. And I also interacted with a number of nations, African, Latin American, in which such a condition for our money to help achieve that goal would be seen as, frankly, an affront. And I wasn't prepared to accept it. I tried to remind my colleagues in my own caucus at the time that it's nice to be, going down that road and say, this is what we do in Canada, so let's impose it on others. But it's not going to work.
It's rather a colonialist mindset.
Well, but I mean, regardless of the issue, I mean, people know where I am. I'm pro-life. I was told that I had to be pro-choice. I said I can't do that. I'm the guy that began the first steps towards the National Organ Donor Registry back in 1996, my first bill. I also was in the business of saving Canadian lives abroad. And so for me, it's just not something I thought was a big issue, but for Mr. Trudeau, it was a huge issue, and it's one that prevented me from being candidate.
I think Canada's going to start funding on large scale abortions in countries where that is not what they're looking for. They actually want help.
It'll be seen as insulting, frankly. I can tell you that now. Many nations are going to take this as quite a sop. If you're telling them that the way in which you get the money is doing it our way, you might get some pushback.
But the downtown progressives will think that we have our spot back on the world stage.
Not through this channel. And if you do believe that, it's you're obviously going down the wrong path.
See, Dan, you started off by saying by the time two leaders get together, so much preliminary has been done, and that makes sense. Briefings. I mean, it's almost like it's just to sign the deal that's already been haggled out, and so. That makes sense to me, and that suggests that there's an enormous amount of diplomatic and bureaucratic support to a prime minister, especially a new prime minister. But at the end of the day, the decision to go that way or that way, the details to be figured out by these bureaucrats, that's to Trudeau. So when you've got a guy saying he admires China for its basic dictatorship, and maybe he would rephrase that, but his admiration for China is clear. He said he would normalize relations with Iran. He says things that I don't think they're gaffes, Stan. His brother made a documentary film with the state film agency of Iran, Press TV. I don't think those are gaffes. And so that's not something that a technocrat or a diplomat would say, well, Mr. Prime Minister, go this way instead of, no. He'll say, we're going that way, you fill in the details. So I'm worried about the grand strokes, not actually the technical details that a diplomat will handle?
So I was the fellow working with Pierre Pettigrew at the time, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, when we broke off our diplomatic mission with Iran. We asked them to send their ambassador home. We recalled ours, and it was over the death of Zara Kazemi,
Right.
the journalist who had been taking pictures and died tragically. I guess she ran into an iron bar.
She
while
was
in prison.
murdered and raped by the Iranian government.
And we took a very strong position on that because it meant a lot, and it was an affront to us as well that something like this could happen, not just because they happened to be a Canadian, but it was also a message that we wanted to send to the regime. Now, how are you going to tell them what to do? The fact is, you won't, but you can't stand back and be silent about either. And we
All
were.
right, so telling nations what to do. It shocked me during one of the debates, and I forget which one now. It was Globe or Monk. Might have been Monk because the niqab issue had really come out then. And we had leaders saying, the progressive leaders saying, we've got to accept the niqab in Canada, which Tariq Fatah will tell you is a foreign Saudi invention and injection into Islam. Others would disagree with them, but I mean, that style of Islam is pushed by Saudi Arabia. And they're saying, we have to accept this in Canada. And in the same debate, Tom Mulcair and Justin Trudeau both said, because of that deal with General Land Dynamics out of London, Ontario, we've got to go to Saudi Arabia and tell them how to run their judicial system based on the same religious ideology that it adheres to the niqab. How well does it go going into foreign countries and telling them how to run their domestic affairs?
My first case on consular was William Sampson. It didn't work out very well. Everything we tried didn't work. We had to find their way in which to do it, which was, of course, the ransom, the dia, the blood money, and, of course, the eldest son saying, I demand that he not be executed and that you send them home. Of course, there's other things about Prince Charles and everything else. William's not with us anymore. Unfortunately, he passed away. But I don't think you can. And frankly, a debate of that nature, which I think sort of took us in a very different trajectory, probably did a lot to harm the NDP. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you're seeing their numbers tonight are nowhere near what any of us would have predicted just 48 hours ago, 24 hours ago, 24 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You know, let's talk about China for a minute. I mean, Pierre Trudeau was an admirer of China. Justin Trudeau was an admirer of China. It's been a liberal pet project. I mean, Jean Chrétien does a lot of business in China now, and his son-in-law, the Desmarais, and their family does business. It's a love for the left, and yet the Northern Gateway Pipeline was the most meaningful way to do commerce there. So I'm putting aside human rights issues now. I'm putting aside democracy and civil liberties. If Justin Trudeau truly loves China for whatever reason, and they wanted to buy oil from Canada through the Northern Gateway Pipeline, and Trudeau said a hard no to that, what does he say or do to China that is meaningful and substantive and economic? What can he bring to his buddies there?
I'm not sure. And I think, you know, if you're looking at, I mean, the investments that Nexen, CNOOC have made into the oil sands, they're not insignificant investments, and I think there's an expectation that somehow, some way, we get one of the most readily accessible forms of oil onto the world market, which they would certainly want, rather than buying it from Russia.
And the thing is, they're buying from Russia or Iran or Saudi right now, so it's not like not selling is improving the moral caliber of the oil they buy.
But I think with respects to China, the engagement has to be in if you are blocked in one area, and this may be a political impasse that he cannot overcome. I mean, there is a lot of opposition to this, and there are a number of native issues that have to be addressed with respect to Northern Gateway. I mean, look at the much trouble we're having with Kinder Morgan. Where all you're doing is basically increasing the pipeline. The Enbridge number 9 line held up, and I mean hundreds of conditions put in. Some of them reasonable. We don't want these things to leak. But there is more to this, where your willingness to do things on an international front, certainly on the trade side, are blocked by domestic realities. Unfortunately for Mr. Trudeau, he's going to have to try to ride all those divergent horses. I don't see how he's going to do it.
Rip your legs apart, I think.
What's that?
Riding divergent horses will rip your legs apart.
Well, that's my point. And I think that's it. He's going to find the role of governing is that he's ultimately going to have to make a decision. People are going to be happy on one side, and people are going to be upset on the other. Now the hard reality of going back from third to first makes governing, and Canadians are going to give him the time. But the economy starts to falter, the time will be very limited.
We've got 30 seconds left. Human rights and trade with China. Jean Chrétien brought it up now and again. Paul Martin brought it up now and again. Stephen Harper went hard at the beginning, then backed off because it didn't work.
how do you straddle that? 30 seconds. Can you tell me how to straddle human rights and trade with China?
You don't. You just keep raising it, and they will push back as they always do. I recall the Uyghur, a fellow who was taken prisoner. I had to raise it. They were upset with me, but I said, look, we've got to have this discussion. And it's not because I want to have this discussion.
That was the guy that Stephen Harper stood outside the bathroom, I think, to go up against Hu Jintao and say, you got to let our guy come.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of the name now. I'll get it in a moment. But the fact is, you need to continue saying it. You may not get the results you want, but you have to at least say to them, this is important from the Canadian point of view. And you have a different perspective, fine, but when you're detaining one of our citizens, we take it a little bit more personally.
All right, Dan, thanks. We'll be back in a bit. Brian Lilley, Ezra Levant, Rebel.media, election results. More numbers coming at you shortly. Back after this.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to therebel.media/themegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We're building a studio. It's not the $1 million studio at Sun News or the $1 billion studios at the CBC, but it does cost money, and we need your help. Will you help us build the studio so we can give you shows you can't get anywhere else? Go to buildthedream.ca to join our crowdfunding campaign.
Welcome back. Brian Lilley here with Hamish Marshall once again talking numbers. Small majority, Hamish. You know, I was just looking in the break. Looks like about 180 right
It could
now
be 100
for the Liberals.
Could be 180, could be 185, somewhere in that range.
So that's a significant, not a huge majority. I mean, we're not talking Diefenbaker or Mulrooney, but those are, you don't have to worry about missing votes.
No.
And for people that aren't in Ottawa all the time, when it's a tight majority, you worry about your MPs being away and missing votes.
Yeah, I think that's comparable in size to what Clay Tam won in 1993. He had 177 seats and he did about 150 for a majority. So,
and if it's about 10 over, it's comparable to what Stephen Harper won in the last one. So this is, you know, similar numbers, but like I said, not the Diefenbaker or Mulrooney landslides.
Right.
I was just looking, and I know you want to talk about 5 Quebec ridings, but I was just looking in Ottawa, where I live, and basically in Ottawa proper, the only MP holding on for the blue side is Pierre Poilievre. You know, Walter Pamick losing in Canada, which had formerly been held by Gordon O'Connor. Andy Wayne losing the part of the riding that had been held by Pierre Poilievre, and then John Baird's riding going. So it's a sweep in Ottawa.
Absolutely. Andrew Leslie winning for the Liberals in Orleans, defeating Royal Gallipo as well.
All right, so he can get on to prosecuting Israel for war crimes and finding new ways to make you pay for his house move. My partisan slip is showing. Let's talk about those Quebec ridings. Tom Mulcair.
Well, first we're going to talk about Laurier Saint-Marie, where Gilles Duceppe is running, trying to make a political comeback. He lost last time, and right now it's in a crazy three-way fight between Duceppe, the Liberal, and the NDP challenger. They're each within a couple % of each other.
Okay.
So he might be able to win it.
Duceppe could come back.
He could come back, but it could go NDP or Liberal just as easily.
All right. Interesting story. I'm going to give just an anecdote about Gilles Duceppe. I remember being in a scrum with him, and he speaks pretty good English, actually very good English. He rarely gets tripped up. And somebody had asked him a question about hating the English, and he said, why would I hate the English? It'd be like hating myself. My grandfather's from Liverpool. And that's a story most people don't know, but the type of stories I get from being in scrums. What's the next riding you want to
The next riding is Louis Saint Laurent. This is eastern part of Quebec City. Conservatives held it in the last few parliaments. They didn't win it in 2011. Hoping to come back with Gerald Deltel, who'd been an MNA with the ADQ, and then the Coalition d'Avenir de Québec.
The CAQ. Let's just call him the CAQ.
Exactly. And it looks like he's won it. He's over 50% of the vote. He will be in addition to the Conservative caucus. The Conservatives are picking up seats in Quebec. Looks like they could be at 9 or 10 seats in Quebec.
9 or 10 seats,
said and done.
Next riding.
Next riding is Mount Royal. This is an area of Montreal, well-off area where the Conservatives had hoped to make a breakthrough with Robert Littman.
So two guys, I'll set the table here.
Sure.
Two guys I used to cover when I was a Montreal reporter, both big players in the Jewish community, both with different activist groups, Anthony Housefather and Robert Littman. Robert Littman had been a mayor in one of the suburbs when Montreal was amalgamated into one big city. He'd been an English rights MNA in the past and head of B'nai B'rith Canada, and then Anthony involved in various things. He's the Liberal candidate,
Yep.
Robert Littman the Conservative. And how's it going?
Well, it looks like Housefather's going to take it. He's about 50% of the vote, with Littman somewhere around in the 30s.
You know, I was talking with someone, that was the first rally Stephen Harper went to the day he called the election, eight years ago on August 2nd, and someone said to me that they went door knocking for Robert Littman and said, I can't find a single person in the neighborhood that hasn't been tutored by Anthony Housefather's riding, or mother. This is going to be a tough one for Littman. And the next riding is what?
Is Outremont, or Tom Mulcair, is a tough fight against the Liberals.
Okay, so that had been a Liberal seat for a long time now. I mean, that was Liberal stomping ground. Martin Cochon held that.
Yeah, and then
Justice Minister.
And then Mulcair won it in a by-election in September of 2007.
Okay.
And has held it since then. He was the first beginning of the NDP breakthrough in Quebec. He held it in the 2008 election, and then of course, was the tidal wave, the Orange Crush last time. But now it looks like he's in a very, very, very tight fight. We'll see if he's able to pull it out in the end, but it's going to be very difficult for him.
Okay, so overall picture though, across Quebec anyway, is not the red sweep that we saw. What about Ontario? And then I'm going to ask you about the prairie provinces.
Well, Ontario, it looks like the Liberals have picked up not only a whole bunch of seats in the Toronto area, sweeping large parts of the Toronto area, but also ending up winning part of regional Ontario, winning seats in London, Kitchener, Waterloo, places like Belleville as well.
They're taking huge chunks of Eastern Ontario, and for more than a decade, Conservative strategists have been saying to me, the Ottawa Valley is the other Alberta.
Right.
And other than Cheryl Gallant and Pierre Poilievre, there's not a lot of blue left in
It's true. Even
Eastern Ontario.
Even Scott Reed in Lanark, Frontenac,
Lennox and Addington,
is which traditionally been a very, very conservative seat, is flipping back and forth. He's in an extremely tight fight.
Liberal breakthroughs in used to be you couldn't find Liberals much between Toronto and Vancouver. Except for Ralph Goodale. What's happening in Manitoba and Saskatchewan?
They've won basically every seat in Winnipeg with the possible exception of Elmwood-Transcona, which the Tories and the NDP are fighting it out for. Liberals haven't really picked up anything in Saskatchewan. Looks like they're going to pick up a couple in Calgary, but perhaps not any in Edmonton.
Okay, and what's the NDP doing out there? Because I know they've been expecting big things in Edmonton, and there was talk that they could win with the redrawing of the boundaries, that they could start winning in Regina and Saskatoon, because they went from being hybrid urban-rural districts to being mostly rural or all urban.
So Saskatoon West, which is one of these pure play urban seats, looks like that's gone NDP as expected, but Regina Leuven, which is people expected the NDP to win, the Conservatives are ahead right now.
All right, so still interesting.
Very much so. And in Edmonton, the NDP hoping for maybe +1, 2, or 3. They might look like they might just pick up one more, maybe not even that.
All right, Hamish Marshall, thanks so much. Stick around, we're not done yet.
Please finish the following sentence. If elected, my first full day as Prime Minister, I would...
current approach on drugs is not working. I'm in favor of legalizing it. 5 or 6 times in my life that I've taken a puff. We can grow the economy, not from the top down the way Mr. Harper wants to, but from the heart outward. Well, deficits are a way of measuring the kind of growth and the kind of success that a government is actually able to create. A commitment to grow the economy, and the budget will balance itself. That I consider that the middle class is people who work for their income, not people who live off their assets and their savings. And if you want to tabulate them, you can go on our website and do that. I'm more focused on actually talking about what we're going to do right away for Canadians than sitting there with a calculator, which you guys can do. Ultimately, I think I might have to go with Hulk. Just to mix it up a bit, because he wears his passions on the outside.
But if you don't want to bomb a group as ghastly as ISIS, when would you ever support real military action as opposed to just training?
Terry, that's a nonsensical question. You know that very well. If something Canada has expertise on is how to face a winter in the mountains with the right kind of equipment. Why aren't we talking more about that? Why aren't we talking more about the kind of humanitarian aid that Canada can and must be engaged in, rather than trying to whip out our CF-18s and show them how big they are? There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime. We have to rethink elements as basic as space and time to go all science fiction-y on you in this sense.
You built, so thank you once again for your help in putting us here, helping us get this set. We know it's only going to get better from this. Ezra, I think you're crazy. He's the one that decided this, by the way, that we're going to do this on election night. So he's crazy. Nuttier than, never mind, I was going to use a bad analogy I heard the other day. But the broadcast gone well. I'm not going to say the election result has gone well. Good for business, not necessarily good for the country.
Well, listen, you've got Rachel Notley running Alberta. She's an anti-oil extremist, the NDP running Alberta.
Win in Ontario.
And now Justin Trudeau, a prime minister with a majority. It looks like he's going to get more than 180 seats. This is a disaster for people who believe in smaller government, for people who believe in personal freedom, for people who believe in national security, for people who believe in a strong foreign policy.
Look, he is going to bring in a national daycare program. He is going to bring in massive intrusions in terms of gun control. And look, for all their talk about C-51 and their worries about warrants and all this, the fact is the gun laws in this country still allow for warrantless searches, and the free speech laws that exist, including with the Supreme Court decision backing it up, still say you can be punished for saying the truth. We saw that with the Supreme Court Watcott decision. None of these files that you and I hold dear are going to get any better.
Oh, they're going to get worse. The only question is how worse and how quickly. I think that with Gerald Butts as the principal whisperer in Trudeau's ears, looking for a full-out attack on anything involving the element of carbon, which means the oil sands, which means coal, which means carbon taxes, cap and trade. I think that you are going to look at a new national energy program.
You and I do things that other people don't, and that is we will read international agreements. So Trudeau's big thing, we're going to go to the Paris conference and we're going to be real players and we're going to re-engage Canada. You know what? That is all about pomp and circumstance and posturing. Most people will not read the text of the agreements that come out. And I know that I do, and it is mostly about what Stephen Harper said it was years ago, sucking money out of wealth-producing nations to give to poor nations. And look, there can be a place for that, although the economist that just won the Nobel Prize in economics, Arthur Deaton, says that it's a horrible thing to do. Foreign aid actually kills developing nations. But that's what this is about. It is not about science. It is about money transfers. We will be on the front lines of that as Justin Trudeau goes to Paris and signs Canada on to a money transfer bonanza.
Yeah. Listen, I think every file that has gradually improved in Canada is going to get worse quickly. And if you believe in industry, if you believe in exports, if you believe in personal property rights, in free
If you
speech.
believe in parents raising their own kids.
If you believe in standing
By
up
the way,
to Sharia law.
You have to turn your kids over next week to the state. You're going to have to. So you and your wife, you're going to have more free time on your hands.
You know what, I think the problem is that in addition to having Notley, Wynne, and Trudeau, you have a media that had such a Harper derangement, such a hatred for the Conservatives, and that so obviously was cheerleading Trudeau. The media party, as I call them, are now going to do a turn so quickly, you'll think they're acrobats. They're going to move from jackal-like opponents to stenographers and cheerleaders. And let me close on this note, Brian. First of all, thank you for coming in from Ottawa and being part of our debut. Thanks to Dan McTague, who's such a good egg and gave a very thoughtful commentary on behalf of the Liberals. Thanks to my friend Theo Caldwell for his passionate views. Our pollster friend Hamish Marshall. Thanks to you, the viewers, who joined us on our debut night while we're ironing out some of the wrinkles in real time on live TV. That's pretty exciting. But here's the thing, our little enterprise here, Brian. You're in Ottawa, I'm here in Toronto, we have a growing team. All of a sudden, I feel like there's a burden on us.
We're the unofficial opposition.
I think so. Do you think it's going to be the CBC? Do you think it's going to be the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail?
Dan made an interesting comment when he was in here. Watch for how many of them are going to start working for Trudeau. And he didn't mean in their media jobs. Now, I know people will point to Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin. Pamela Wallin hadn't been in broadcasting a long time when she was appointed to the Senate, and Duffy is an anomaly. You know, I can point to many journalists that have jumped to working for the Liberals in the past. There's going to be a bunch that jump after this into some plum jobs. Hello, BuzzFeed, you'll be looking for more people soon. Lots of jobs opening up like that. And then they'll work for the Liberals from the inside instead of from the outside. But the media will continue to support the Liberals. And you know what? For all those people that say, oh, Lilley, you're just crazy, that's conservative conspiracy. First person that told me that when I arrived up on Parliament Hill, Ian Capstick, who's now on CBC on a regular basis, NDP pundit, then one of Jack Layton's top aides, said, the media backed the Liberals to the hill.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Well, let me give you, the viewers, my promise in closing. In 8 months, we've moved from our living rooms to this studio, and we gave it a great first try tonight, and in the days and weeks ahead, we're going to iron out the wrinkles and make a better show stronger and stronger till we get to an hour a day of quality TV that you can turn on every day at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're going to keep doing the little video bites. We've done 1,700 of them since February. We're going to keep with the written comments too. But all of a sudden, I feel like we have an increased importance because who is there left to be the contrarian view? I'm not just talking about to be conservative. Who's the skeptics? Who's the ones asking the tough questions? Do you really expect the cheerleaders of this campaign to suddenly turn into skeptics of Trudeau? I don't. And so I personally pledge, and Brian, I know you're with me, that we will take the Rebel.media and do our best to use our wits and to use the resources we have to provide the kind of independent, vigorous, skeptical journalism and strong commentary that the media party cannot and will not do. We're going to be hated for it. I wouldn't be surprised if we're slapped with some human rights inquisition. But that is my pledge, is to try to provide a counterweight to this Trudeau majority government. What do you say, Brian?
Absolutely, and I'll be there doing it in Ottawa, be at the scrums, we'll be at the news conferences, and we'll bring you the coverage that nobody else will.
Brian, thanks for that. Good night, everybody, and thanks for joining us on the Rebel.media.